Hey guys, my name is Ryan, and recently we had some spoilers come out for Horizons of Spirit Island. If you do not want to see spoilers for this game, you should click away from this video now, because for the rest of it, we're just going to be doing spoiler content. Target accidentally sent out a few copies of this game early, so naturally, as people receive them, they take pictures and everything goes up online. So I have not proxied and played any of these spirits. I am purely analyzing these based on my experience with the game and my intuition, and just based on what I see, how I think they're going to work. So for each of these spirits, I'm going to take a look at their presence tracks and see maybe they have any low points where you might be incentivized to go a certain way, or maybe you might hit a certain cap where it's harder to efficiently go down a track. You might not be as excited to do so, and that might prevent you from hitting higher levels of your innate, or you might be restricted in how much energy you can gain, and that could change your playstyle. We're going to take a look at the growth options each spirit has, and we're going to consider various possible openings. Since we're also going to be able to see their starting cards, we can try out different combinations of starting cards and different growth options to see if we can hit our innates and if we can do something effective on the board. I am going to predict how good I think these spirits are going to be in terms of offense, control, fear, defense, what kind of support they give. Is this the kind of spirit that wants to receive support? And if so, what kind of support do they want to receive? How good are they at moving to Han? And then we're going to consider what kind of cards do you want to gain. Some spirits really, really need elements. And so it almost doesn't even matter what the card does. You'll take anything with your elements. Other spirits need cards that have certain effects. So you might take off-color cards just to make sure that you get the abilities that you want. And then lastly, we'll be talking about the different adversaries in the game and how I expect that this spirit will perform against each of them. This is going to be a bit of a longer video, so you can click on the image of any of these spirits and it'll jump you to the beginning of that spirit's conversation. I hope you enjoy. Alright, up first we have Bright Whirlwind. So this is absolutely a control spirit. And so let's take a look at all the things they do. Starting first with a special rule. After you add a presence during growth, push an explorer or a town from that land. And we can take a look at the growth options and see that our reclaim does not add a presence. However, growths 2 and 3 both do. One of them giving you energy, and then one of them giving you an additional card. Our growth 1 is a reclaim with a card gain and an energy gain. So just right there off the bat, before looking at anything else, we know that moving a single explorer can be incredibly powerful, as that will prevent a build from happening. And if you prevent a build and there's nothing there, then your Ravage will also not have anything happen. So it's pretty clear to me that right off the gate from turn 1, Bright Whirlwind can get very far ahead of the invaders, right? Because you're only going to have to deal with 1 out of the 2 lands for your first couple turns, unless if you have some unfortunate luck. So that's very interesting to me. That's insanely powerful, and that's got to be compensated in some way with other weaknesses. So let's take a look at everything else. On the presence tracks, you max out at 6 energy and 5 cards. So that's a ton of energy. You can absolutely go for some big majors. And 5 cards a turn, that gives you tons of flexibility, so minors or majors should be an option. But really, going for minors is dependent on having a good innate. So if we look at that, we can see that we have a slow range 1 ability, and it can push a single explorer, then it can produce a fear, and then push 2 explorers or towns. Pushing 2 towns, that's significant. Let's see, the third stage, for each invader pushed by this power, 1 damage in the land it was pushed to. Oh, interesting. Okay, so that's not going to be enough to kill towns. It will be able to kill explorers, but it can deal some damage to towns, so if we have some supplemental damage, we can finish off those towns. And then at the last level, deal 4 damage and target land. And that's significant because if we can hit that top lever, or that top layer, we get everything. So we'll push an explorer and 2 towns, and then kill a city that's remaining, plus an explorer as well, if there's another explorer there. So if we can hit this, so that can actually be a legitimate win condition, is just hitting that innate over and over and over again. So if we were to go straight across the bottom track, get 5 card plays, we need 5 wins in order to hit that top level innate. We could, just nuke 1 land every single turn, plus all the utility that comes with playing 5 cards. If we take a look at that track, if we go straight bottom, we do get a free air and a free sun. So we can actually hit that top level in only 4 turns, since we can only add 1 presence a turn. At minimum, we could get there in 4 turns if we have perfect elements. So that's interesting. On the right, you'll see my notes, the things that I'm looking for when I'm analyzing a spirit. So track low point, is there a certain weakness? Every single element that we gain is perfect for our innate, and so that's all good. And then every single presence that we add gives us an advantage. It's not like you add a presence and you go from 2 energy gained to 2 energy gained with no elements, and you wind up in the exact same place that you were beforehand. So there's no low points on the track. For the growth options, it's pretty standard. A lot of spirits have this simple kind of option where you have a simple reclaim with cards and energy, and then you can either add a presence with energy or add a presence with cards, and then the combos to hit the innates. So that gets into our starting cards. So let's take a look at them. Gift of the Sunlit Air. Okay, it gives us both sun and wind. Target spirit gets an extra range with other powers, and the gain in energy. Very cool. It's very weak in solo play. In solo play, hitting your different targets is not going to be a big problem because we have a 4 range growth option, so that's not a big deal. Let's see. This second one, Gift of Windsped Steps, is another target any spirit card. Target spirit may make 1 power that says push or gather fast for this turn, and then give them energy. Okay, so it makes a power, so we can use our innate because our innate does have push, and even though it does do damage at the top, at the highest end, it still is able to be made fast because it is a push power. So that could be really useful, especially in the late game, targeting yourself with that, and then just blowing up lands, especially right before they ravage. We don't really need to defend because we can just, kill a bunch of stuff. So that's cool. Scatter to the Winds. Okay, this one does not have a sun, but it does have a wind. Cost an energy. Choose up to 5 dudes, towns, or Dahan, and push them to as many different lands as possible. Interesting. That can certainly be very powerful, but because you're not able to group up into a single land and instead have to disperse them, that seems like the kind of card that you wouldn't want to use in the mid to late game when you're trying to consolidate the explorers and kill them efficiently. So I'm not so sure how good that one is. I can see it being good in the early game. If you happen to accidentally be pushing everything into 1 land, and then that's the card that flips over at the beginning of stage 2 or something. But besides that narrow use, I don't think Scatter the Wind is going to be very powerful. I could see us forgetting that card for a major. And then 2 cost, Tempest of Leaves and Branches. Choose up to 5 different invaders and 1 damage to each of them. Now that is significant. So that's actually going to combo really well with the 3rd level of our innate, where dealing 1 damage to things that we had just pushed. So I previously mentioned that it would be hard to kill off the towns because we'd only be dealing 1 damage to them, and we need to be able to deal another damage in order to kill them, but Tempest of Leaves and Branches allows us to do that. So that's very interesting. That gives us Tempest plus our innate is the only way that we can actually destroy invaders, but it does so very effectively. And in fact, comboing those two, let's see. If we had, what is the most that we could possibly deal with by just comboing our top level innate plus Tempest? Right, let's say we had an Explorer, Town. Okay, all of that would be dealt with Tempest. That would be 2 of our 5 different invaders. So let's just say we had city, right? 2 towns, 3 cities. Those are the 5 ones that we deal 1 damage to. So our innate, the 3rd level, would push and kill those 3. And that would leave the 3 cities. Each of them has 2 health, and we're dealing 4 damage. So we'd be able to destroy 2 of the cities. And that would leave 1 city behind. So that means that if we were to have 2 of everything, 2 explorers, 2 towns, and 2 cities, we could kill all of that with our top level innate and our Tempest of Leaves and Branches. In combination with Gift of Wind-Sped Steps, you could do all of that fast. Has to be just 1 range away from a sacred site. That's the only restriction there. But that would be, let's see, 1 fear from the innate. Nothing else innately produces fear. So 2 for the towns, 4 for the cities. So it'd be 6, 7 fear. It'd be a little 7 fear combo to do that. And how viable is that? Right, so we would, to hit the 3 suns, 5 winds, we would need to have, let's just say, 4 card plays. In fact, yeah, if we just play all of our starting cards, okay, that's 4 card plays with the air that comes off of our track, we can hit that because we have 3 suns and 4 winds in our starting cards. With the extra wind, gives us the 3 and 5 that we need in order to do that. So that's interesting. That costs you a total of 4 energy. On a reclaim, you gain 1. So in order to do that every single turn for the rest of the game, if you wanted to have like a perpetual reclaim loop, you'd have to have 3 energy per turn and then 4 cards per turn. And of these, Scatter to the Winds is obviously the first card that you'd be looking to replace, because the card doesn't really do anything effective, and it's a 1-cost blank that simply provides a wind. So if we could draft any 0-cost wind card, it can just be a total blank. Then we can do this cycle off of less energy, off of 3 energy, so we'd only need to be 1 presence off the top and 4 presence off the bottom. So in theory, we could do this perpetually from turn 5 on. That's incredibly powerful. Well, before we get too deep into that, let's go down the different things that a spirit can do. See what they're good at and see what they're not so good at. So, offense. Even though I was just talking about being able to blow up everything in a single land, from my perspective, Sunbright does not have very good offense. Up until you hit the top level of your innate, which is pretty narrow, you can't kill anything. You cannot deal with any towns. You can just push them and you have to wait. So that's going to be very low on offense. Control, on the other hand, is incredibly high. Being able to push explorers on growth prevents builds and everything from there. Being able to push towns can prevent cities from being built in case we explore into the land that starts with a town. So control is very, very high on this spirit. On the contrary, fear is very low. Across your innate and all of your starting cards, you can only produce 1 single fear. So that's not going to win you the game. And defense, there is no defense whatsoever. Okay, so this is very high control, very low on everything else. Support, give or receive. 2 of your starting cards can give a boost to another player. So that's very strong for support. In terms of receiving support, this spirit is already really good at what it does. The types of support that you typically would get would be energy and cards, but the way that I see it, we're not going to be starving for energy or cards. Because we could go like growth 3 ad nauseum, right? Maybe we get a second energy. Or maybe you just go growth 2 to start, and then you just hit growth 3 ad nauseum until you finally run out of cards, and then you need to reclaim. But this seems like the kind of spirit that doesn't need to receive any support, but being able to give extra range, energy, and being able to make slow powers fast are all very, very powerful abilities. So this is definitely a great one to offer support. And as far as Dahan control, there's none. Scatter to the Winds pushes Dahan into different lands, and Dahan want to be bunched up into lands. So that's not very good. It is worth noting that you can use your special rule during growth to move a single Dahan. So perhaps you could use Scatter to the Winds to push 2 Dahan to 2 different adjacent lands, and then the next turn grow into one of those lands to bring those 2 Dahan back together. That's not a bad way to move 2 Dahan from one place to another. It just seems a little inefficient to me. So overall, we are incredibly good at control, and we are incredibly weak at everything else. So when we're drafting cards, we already have all the elements that we could need. We have a free 2 and 2 coming off of our tracks. So that's already really nice. Certainly we'd prioritize wind over sun, but we really need damage with this spirit. I can see that we would not really need any defense because our control is so effective that we're not going to be staring down massive ravages. So in my opinion, when it comes to drafting cards, we want to take anything that'll give us damage, because that'll allow us to start picking off all these buildings. And, we just basically need to keep our head above water until we scale into our top level innate, and then, try and hit that every turn, every other turn, until we finally lock down the game. All right, so now let's think about how we could possibly open with this spirit. Because we can only add 1 presence a turn, we either can have 2 energy and a single card play, or 2 card plays and a single energy on turn 1. And I think it's pretty obvious we're going to want to go for 2 card plays, because that first level innate is incredibly powerful. Being able to push an additional explorer in the slow phase of turn 1 could give us a free turn, right? So if we have just a single explorer and the 2 wetlands after everything that happens on turn 1, go to the slow phase, push one of them out with our innate, and then push the other one out during growth on the next turn. That means that we skip an entire build and we skip an entire ravage, and that gives us an opportunity to scale. So finding those little turns where you can get away with doing nothing productive on the board just to add more presence is always important. So we're either going to have to gain energy, or we're going to have to gain a card. If we were to gain a card, we'd have to hope for a good 0 cost. Otherwise, we'd have to play Gift of Sunlit Air on turn 1. And I usually play the game solo. So Gift of Sunlit Air is largely a blank, although on the very first turn of the game, that is when you're going to be facing some of the biggest targeting restrictions. So that's actually not so bad. Being able to push an explorer from 2 away as opposed to just 1. Oftentimes there's a single land in one of the corners that you can't quite reach yet. So that's actually not bad. Being able to help a teammate's always good too. Gift of Windsped Steps is cute, but not great. All it does is let you push an explorer fast as opposed to slow. And I'm not so sure that that's something that we're really going to want to do. So we'd probably go ahead and play Scatter to the Winds as our other card, assuming we draft a blank. So turn 1, we could do something like grow 3, and then play Sunlit Air and Scatter. Okay, so that would leave us with 0 energy, and then Gift of Windsped, Tempest of Leaves and Branches, and a random card at the end of turn 1. Okay. Then we could do, if we really wanted to, we could do something like growth 2, go across bottom again. Okay, so let's just say bot, and then we could play the whole hand. If we did that, as long as we drafted any card that has a wind, let's learn how to spell correctly. If we drafted any card that has wind, that will give us our second level of our innate. But let's think about this, right? Because we set ourselves up such that our second Explorer card, we push one of the Explorers away immediately, and we use our special rule during growth to push the other away. So therefore, hitting that next level innate is not super powerful. So perhaps this second turn would be when we would have a bit of a scaling turn. So for scaling, we'd probably want to go for growth 3 again, just maximize the number of cards we have in hand. And we probably don't need the third card play. So maybe we go top here, and then we'd have 2 random cards plus Gift of Windsped and Tempest of Leaves and Branches. Tempest of Leaves and Branches doesn't really do anything until we hit our third level innate. So we might play Gift. We might play our 2 random cards. 2 cards. I'll put it down for that. Right? If we can hit the Sun and 2 winds, that'd be especially nice. Right? This really depends on what we have. If either one of the cards has a wind, maybe we play that along with Gift of Windsped Steps. Okay? Either way, we'd be down to 2 cards in hand. And so then, let's see. If we had 0/0 as those 2 costs, or 0/1, then we could go growth 3 again, across bottom, and then play 3 cards. Right? We play our new card, plus Gift, plus Tempest. That would probably give us our third level innate, which may or may not be useful. But, that really maximizes our options there. And then we go for a growth 1 reclaim. So by the time that we reclaim, we'll have 2 energy per turn and 3 card plays, which is a pretty nice spot to be in. It's a pretty flexible spot. And we can, from there, we can decide which way we want to go. Certainly we can, regardless of which way we grow, we're going to be picking up an element. So our situation's not necessarily going to improve. An element kind of counts like half of a card play. So maybe we go for growth 1, and then we could do like a growth 3, and then use that with Tempest and hit our third level innate. And then go from there. So that is 5 turns before we can really destroy anything. That's tricky, because that puts us halfway through stage 2 before we can even start to remove invaders from the board. So by the time that we build up the card plays to start removing stuff, we very well could start getting overwhelmed. And certainly we're not going to have produced any fear, right? I doubt we'd have a single fear card by the time we hit turn 5. So this could turn really tricky for us. All right. So let's consider the way that we might play against various adversaries. So you got Prussia, Sweden, England, France, Habsburg, Russia, and Scotland. So Prussia is definitely going to be our easiest matchup because they don't have any way of overcoming a pushed explorer. They don't really have any resilience, any way to still deal damage and ravage in that case of one explorer being pushed. It should be pretty easy to not lose to them outside of the smaller invader deck. So the big thing we're going to need here is fear cards. Okay, fear producing cards. because we have enough control just built into our package that it's pretty hard to lose from Blight. Taking this growth pattern that we looked at before, we're probably going to take one Blight, right? We have our special rule, growth on one of them, scatter the winds, that solves 2 of the 4 opening lands on BP6. So we're still threatened by 2 of them. So, okay, right, maybe we just draft a blank and we're stuck taking 2. If we draft anything decent, we can prevent one of those last 2, like a defend card, right? Then we can only take 1 Blight off of the opening stage 3 card. So having that much control so fast makes us super strong against Prussia. Against Sweden, it's very much the same, right? The only thing to consider here is that Sweden has the ability to transform your Dahan. We might find ourselves using our special rule more to push Dahan and bunch them up and save them from being transformed than we do Explorers. And if that's the case, one small misstep could really make that one spiral. But we don't have any defense, so we're not relying on something that Sweden can overcome. But we have a lot of control, which Sweden, falls pretty easily to. So I can see this being a pretty good matchup as well. But I think here we want to care more about offense than we care about fear-producing cards, since the fear decks can be a little bit bigger. They have a little bit of a stronger opening position. We're going to want to find ways to deal damage early in order to fight back. Against England, woof. Well, our special rule is largely a blank. Pushing towns could make us lose faster. Scatter to the winds, pushing a bunch of towns to a bunch of different directions. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you have to play when you're at like 5 buildings and you're like, crap. Right? And you push out 3 towns and you still have 2 cities, and so you're still getting slammed. This seems like a bad matchup for us. So I'm going to say against these guys, we need to go for majors. And really just luck of the dice. Hopefully we can draw something nice, but that's going to be one of the hardest matchups for us. France. Having 2 explorers instead of just 1 is surprisingly challenging because our special rule doesn't completely solve a land. Right? We'd have to use like a special rule and then use our innate, make it fast in order to push 2 explorers out, and that's a lot of labor to be done just to prevent 1 build. So this is where I can see our 2nd level innate becoming pretty powerful because at least at the beginning of the game, when you have 2 explorers, they build, it turns into 2 towns and a single explorer. So pushing 2 towns can, at least prevent a blight, but that additional loss condition could really kick us in the butt. Earlier, we were talking about the most amount of stuff that you can remove with your innate plus Tempest, and that'd be 2 explorers, 2 towns, and 2 cities. When you get into the mid game, you could have a land with nothing in it, and after France explores and then has their stage 2 escalation and then builds, you're left with a city, 2 towns, and an explorer. So it's just a city and an explorer less than that upper cap, but it's within the range of what some Bright Whirlwind can deal with when it taps out. So if you can get yourself to that midpoint quickly, right, maybe receive a little bit of support from someone, so that way you can add a few more presents before you reclaim, that could be the strategy. Maybe that's the time that you're going to want to invest some support into Sunbright, so that way they can knock down all of those big lands as France hits those in the mid game. So here, I'm going to say you want to receive small support. It's just a matter of surviving the early game, trying not to lose to all those towns being built up, and then if you can receive a little bit of support such that you can start hammering down and fighting back, I think that's the ticket to win here. Habsburg. All right, well, with our 2nd level innate, it's going to be pretty hard for us to take 8 damage in a single Ravage because we can push 4 of it away. So the additional loss condition is not going to be a big deal. And in fact, this might actually be a good matchup for us because we can push all of the towns into a blighted land and then deal 1 damage to them in combination with Tempest and all that jazz. I can actually see this being a decent matchup for us. So here, my note would be that it's probably good. And then just more small damage. So that way we can have like we can build up a single land, keep on pushing towns into that one land, right? And then kill 5 of them in one swing with Tempest. And then, some other 1 damage card. So for example, if we have the ability to repeat a power, Tempest is a great one to repeat, and we can kill 5 towns in one swoop with Habsburg since they have a tendency to clump up. This one's definitely going to take a little bit of skill, but I can see that one being good. Russia. This matchup is going to be tricky. So Russia, they have a very weak starting position, and if you can jump the gun quickly, you can win very fast. However, we don't produce really any fear up quickly. We can push all the explorers and we can make such that nothing happens in the early game. However, when it comes to the mid game, we are gonna be in a world of pain because we're pushing all of these explorers. We're inevitably going to be getting triples in multiple lands, and then we're just going to get a waterfall of blight. So Tempest is very important for us in here because being able to kill 4 explorers and then push 1 is great. Because it's fast, we can protect ourselves from those triple explorer ravages. And then in this situation, we'd probably use our innate to push 3 explorers and then deal a damage to all of those explorers. So kill 2 and fear and then push it again. So this matchup I can actually see being pretty decent for us since we have the ability to do 1 damage to multiple explorers at a time with 2 different abilities. Scatter the Winds might actually not be terrible here because it allows us to break up those triple explorer lands just to help us keep our head above water for a little bit. So this one I can easily see getting out of our control because being able to push 1 explorer at a time with our special rules is never going to be enough. It'll help us survive the first couple turns, but the mid game is going to be real rough for us. So here, I would say we would want fear-producing cards. Because we need to end games against Russia quickly. If we get too many turns into the mid game, we're just going to suffer. And last but not least, Scotland. So for Scotland, in many ways, it kind of plays like a generic Civ. Anything inland, we can just push and explore and then not have to deal with it. On the coast, though, it's going to be tricky for us because they don't add explorers, so our special rule does nothing. And we'd have to hit our level 2 innate in order to push that town away, but then it still builds anyways. So the coasts are going to be rough for us. I can see us completely cleaning out land 6, 7, 8 very quickly, and then just struggling to keep our head above water on the coastlands. It's a legitimate concern that we might lose to the Scotland additional loss condition. So yeah, this one can be tricky for us. Also, Scatter the Winds might not be terrible here because if you were to have like a town that's in a coastal land and then it explores again, adds another town, being able to push multiple towns with a single card, it's not bad. It doesn't help us win the game, but it helps us avoid the additional loss condition. But relying on that feels pretty weak. So Scotland here, Scotland has tons of fear. There's 16 fear cards. So this very well could be a majors build for us. Our innate will be good, but not insane against them because they just have so many buildings. They're very resilient in the long term. And we don't really want to get caught in our reclaim loop at like 3.5, 4 card plays and 2 energy. That's really not where we want to be. That's not a great long-term victory condition. So Scotland, we definitely want to pick up some big damage so that we can clear those coastal lands. And if we can do that, clearing the inlands will be much, much easier for us. So, because of Scotland 6, our special rule loses a lot of value quickly. So we need to draft into that damage because we can't rely on that control going into the mid-game. Up next, we have Eyes Watch from the Trees. So this one, its special rule is after one of your powers adds Defend to a single land, gather up to 1 Dahan into that land. That is a very powerful ability. Defense by itself without Dahan is kind of useless. It prevents a single blight from coming into existence, right? Maybe it prevents a blight cascade, but it doesn't actually help you win the game. It gives you time, so you can add presence, but it doesn't inherently produce any fear, and it doesn't remove any invaders. So this special rule moves a Dahan in, which gives you a little bit of kickback, and, kills a town, right? So it removes an invader from the board, and it produces a single fear. So already this one special rule is fascinating. It shores up the biggest weakness that spirits that Vital Strength of the Earth. One of his big weaknesses is he's great at defending, but he's not actually good at winning the game because it doesn't produce fear, and with only one ability to move Dahan, he struggles to reliably, consistently fight back with Dahan. By having that built in, I'm sure we're going to see more defend coming from this guy. Taking a look at the growth options, we have a pretty standard looking Reclaim. Reclaim cards, gain power card, gain an energy. Cool. Growth 2 adds 2 presence, just like Lightning Swift Strike's Growth 2, right? Range 2 and then range 0. So basically it says add a Sacred Site within 2 range, anywhere you want. That's nice. And then Growth 3 gives us a power card, adds a presence at range 3, nice and far, plus an energy. So one thing that's interesting is that you don't have any ability that gives you a lot of energy in one shot, right? Only +1 energy on 2 different card gains says to me that you can't just have a massive spike of energy, throwing down multiple majors, and just going huge on one turn. So I'm curious to see how the rest of this plays out. Looking at your presence tracks, looks like you have 11 presents to add, which means you have 2 on your starting board. Don't know if they're a Sacred Site or together, but regardless, your energy goes up to 4, and your very first energy, or your very first presence coming off the energy track is a blank, right? You add it, and there's no marginal benefit. On your card plays, looks like every single one of these gives you a marginal benefit, so that naturally pushes you towards getting more card plays and having lower energy. And coupled with the fact that you have small energy spikes, suggests to me that this guy's going to play much more of a minor powers role, trying to pick up a bunch of 0 cost because you're naturally going to be drawn towards more card plays instead of more energy. Combining that with our special rule, there is a lot of good defend cards in the minor power deck, and there's a lot of good Dahan movement cards. So all that kind of fits together nicely. Looks like you're looking for grass, wind, and air. Or grass, wind, and moon. Sorry. I think there's a lot of Dahan movements in wind, but there's no earth here, which is interesting if we're planning on having some kind of defensive play style. And we get to our innate. It's 1 range away from a Sacred Site, so Growth 2 can add a Sacred Site anywhere. And looks like it is just increasing fear and defend. And this looks almost exactly like Many Minds moves as 1. That innate, where each step you just get more defense and more fear. And we know that Many Minds is one of the best solo spirits in the game because you can just stall out. He has tons of fear producing starting cards, and the fear-producing defensive innate. And then here with Eyes Watch, you also have some free Dahan movement. So the special rule couples really nicely with the innate. So I think that's really going to be the core of our strategy, is just fear, defend, moving some Dahan around. And we don't really need to worry about offense necessarily, because we're going to be having built-in offense with our special rule. So let's take a look at our starting cards. So first we have Boon of Watchful Guarding. Targets any spirit. In one of target spirit's lands, defend 4. They can spend 1 energy to instead make it defend 8. Wow, that is strong. Paying 1 energy for defend 8 is insane. And, a 0-cost defend 4. In the early game, we're not going to be getting hit for more than 4 anyways. The highest we can get hit for in the very early game is 6 if we grow into the land that has the starting town. We might just let one thing go, or you could just pay 1 energy and block that off entirely. But that's great, and you can target another spirit. So maybe we use our innate to defend one of our lands, and we just need to tell our buddy to grow into that land, into a land so they can defend 0. And I believe if you target someone else, it's still your power, and so your teammate can use your special rule to move Dahan in. So this would be a great way to provide a little bit of utility and support in an abnormal way, because maybe we have some kind of offensive spirit who's not quite ready to deal with a land, or they want to be able to scale instead of having to attack immediately. Boon is fantastic for that. It only produces a grass out of the 3 elements that we care about, so that is worth noting, but grass is the one that we need the most of. So, well, I bet you we're going to be using Boon every reclaim cycle. Like, this card will always be getting used. Hey, Eerie Noises and Moving Trees cost 2, that's expensive. 2 fear, that's nice. And then push 2 explorers or towns. Cool. So we can push towns away, so that way we don't even have to worry about defending a land, and it still produces fear. So similar to just defend and fear, it's just stalling and producing fear. So I like that. Produces all 3 of our elements. So it's expensive, but it gives us everything that we could want. Also worth noting that being able to push explorers and towns can prevent builds in the early game. So we'll have to consider that when it comes to our potential openings. Let's see, Mysterious Abductions. 1 cost fast, fear, and 1 damage at range 0. So basically that says 1 fear, kill an explorer. We can definitely use that early game. Before too much stuff builds up, just being able to pick off explorer, denying builds, and it produces a fear, so that's really nice. That's a really good card. I can see it being really useful in the early game and tapering off over the course of the game. But it does produce 2 of our 3 elements. Looks like wind is our least important element, so missing that's not so bad. And then last, we have Whispered Guidance Through the Night. Range 1 from a jungle, okay, but it's slow, cost 0. And gather 3 Dahan. If Dahan are present in the same land as invaders, produce a fear. And it produces all of our elements. So all combined, we have 4 fear from our starting cards, plus the fear from our innate. So we have the ability to push out a lot of fear and a lot of defense. So that is really strong. I can see us getting having really strong openings and scaling really well throughout the whole game. I mean, having a defend 8 in addition to our innate, which in the mid game could be like defend 6, that would be sweet. Actually, as I look at the innate and I look at the presence track, we're not going to be hitting the innate, or sorry, the wind that comes on our bottom track is also actually a blank, at least in the early game, because we can't use it until we get to tier 3 of our innate, which requires 4 plants. And I mean, if we go straight across the bottom, we're at 2 card plays, right? We would need both of those plants, which, you know, come down the line. Yeah, so that wind is actually, so this guy actually has 2 blanks, which weakens him quite a bit in the early game, which makes sense. He needs to have some kind of weakness in the early game, because having so much defense and that Dahan just one Dahan in the early game does so much. It helps, prevent the invaders from building up and snowballing on you. That's good to know. So let's see. Every single one of his cards produces grass. 3 of his cards produce wind. So it's going to be really easy to hit your innates because, let's just say we play all of our starting cards, right? That's 3 wind, 2 moon, 4 grass. 3 wind, 2 moon, 4 grass. If we just go bottom track, right? If we just go straight across the bottom track and get 4 card plays and we get those 2 elements, that's enough to hit our top tier innate, right? Because we have the extra wind and the extra plant. That's 5 fear plus defend 12, which defends everything, right? Like we're never going to be hitting 12s unless we're against Sweden. So that's interesting. And only 3 energy. It's totally possible for us to do that. Just go straight across the bottom and just start slamming defend 12, and we have defend 4. Maybe we have an extra energy, right? We could do a defend 8 plus our 4 extra fear, moving to Han, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, this guy's insane. This guy's gonna be crazy good. That's really strong. So let's run through the various attributes. So offense, this guy has no offense. The only damage ability that we have is Mysterious Abductions, which 1 damage basically just kills an explorer, right? So I don't really want to consider that as offense. It's not really removing buildings. So offenses, we're pretty close to 0. Control, all we have for control is Eerie Noises, and since that's a 2-cost card, when it looks like we're going to be struggling for energy with the spirit, that's not going to be played all too often. So our control is looking pretty low as well. But fear, insane, right? 4 fear in our starting hand. The highest in the game is Shadows, I believe, has 8. Second highest, I believe, is Sharp Fangs at 6, and then it goes down from there. But yeah, having 4 starting fear is incredible. With all the fear that comes from our innate, we'll be getting extra fear every single turn. Tons of fear. And then defense, obviously, we're insane on as well. Support, we can give support in the form of defense, but that smooths out some people's openings. But in the mid to late game, that may not be insane. We might be using it more for ourselves just to lock down our board. Depends how our early game goes. But this guy does not seem to provide a ton of support. As far as needing to receive support, we'll have to take a look at how his opening flows as we play through that. But I can see this guy working kind of independently. Maybe receiving energy is probably where we're going to be the most, though. Getting something like Boon of Vigor from River, we would probably really appreciate. And then Dahan, we're fantastic with Dahan. We have a Gather 3 ability, and then we have our Special Roll, which moves single Dahans quite a bit. So we're strongest in Fear, Defense, and Dahan. And those 3 kind of work as like a trifecta, because Fear, helps you end the game, right? Just picking up Fear cards can give you little advantages. Defense buys you time, being able to, stall the game out. But adding Dahan to defense becomes your offense, and it also produces more fear. So it looks like this guy will be able to get ahead really nicely with all this defense. For some spirits, we really hope and pray to avoid exploring into lands with those buildings early. But with Eyes Watch, because we have so much defense so quickly, I feel like exploring into land 2 right off the bat might be the best possible situation for us. Here, let's think about our different openings. So it's worth considering. We always want to try and add more presence whenever possible. So Growth 2 is always an enticing option. If we consider that the first layer of the energy track is a blank and the second presence off the card place track is a blank, if we go for the double presence placement, really we're looking at the 2 energy in one card or 1 energy and 2 cards. No other combination are going to be able to get better than that. So with 2 card plays, right, that gives us the ability to use our innate. We don't necessarily care about that because on the first turn there is no Ravage, so having a defend 2 isn't great. And, we can get away with, having a little bit of a slower turn, turn 1. So that makes me think that we might want to open on growth 3 and go, if we go growth 2, go top to get the 2 energy. Or maybe we could go growth 3 on the bottom. Either way, we would end with having 3 cards in hand, which would allow us a stronger position. So let's just say we went for like growth 2, going top. We could play Mysterious Abductions, kill off an Explorer. We could play Eerie Noises because we could push an Explorer and a town away after the build happens. But we could also use Whispered Guidance through the night, being able to set up some Dahan and defense for next turn. Right, like setting up for some real nice counterattack on the next turn. Right, so if we went top, we might just go straight to... I guess it really depends on... So let's just say they explore into 2 lands, independent, that are otherwise empty. We'd probably be better off going for Mysterious Abductions and then setting up for a level 1 innate the next turn, because the defend 2 will protect against the other land. If they were to explore into land number 2, right, so they have an Explorer in a city. If you're playing Horizons, there's no disease there, but otherwise there'd be a disease. So with the disease, they'd be hitting for 4. The defend 2 would be insufficient. And without the disease, they're hitting for 6, and that's even worse. And in both of those situations, Eerie Noises, Mysterious Abductions doesn't do anything. We'd probably have to wind up using a boon there, but in that situation, if we explored into land number 2, then we would probably want to use Whispered Guidance and then tee up with boon. If they were to explore into the land with the town, we'd ultimately wind up in the same situation, where they'd be hitting for 6, so we'd want to be using boon of Watchful Guarding against that as well. So if the opening Explore goes into either land with a building, I think the best option would actually be to go bottom. Yeah, as I'm looking at this, maybe we would want to go for growth 3, go for bottom, and then play Mysterious Abductions. And Whispered Guidance. Because that would end us with, we deal to end turn with 1 energy, boon, Eerie Noises, plus whatever other card we have. And we would happen to get a free Fear along the way as well from our innate, defending nothing. But if we do that, we just have to, basically not utilize our 3 range, make sure that we have a Sacred Site, assuming we don't start with 1. Okay. Certainly Mysterious Abductions is really strong to play on turn 1, because we hope to set that up such that we can, pick off the isolated Explorer, and then Whisper Guidance set up otherwise. And that would be if they explore into a building, right? Opening Explorer into a building, right? And then after that, we would want to play Boon, and then go from there. So if we were to do that, Right, so if we open up with growth 3, we would have 1 energy and 2 card plays, no exposed elements. We'd probably want to go then growth 2, going top, and then from there do boon and eerie noise. Because then we will have 2 energy gain, 2 card plays, and we'll have 1 card left in hand. So we could use our boon on the land that we moved all the Han into, and that has, going to be hitting for 6. So we'd need to spend the 1 energy, unless if we're within 1 range of a sacred site, to add our innate to it. But hopefully we could just add our innate, right? Because that would give us a defend 2. So that would be a defend 6 plus a fear. So that would be, that would be able to take care of it. So defend 4 plus our defend 2. We'll protect our souls from that land. That's hitting for 6. And then eerie noises will be able to tee us up for a future turn. If we do all of that, depending on our situation, we could either do growth 3 or growth 1, depending on the board state. Growth 3 would be the greedy option, right? If we think that we're doing fantastic, pretty far ahead, we could do growth 3, and then ultimately it's the 2 cards that we drafted that would be able to play. We probably would want to go top if we did growth 3, because that actually gives us a benefit. If we went bottom, because like that plant's like half a card play, right? So if we had 2 Moongrass cards, then that would unlock our 2nd level innate by picking up that plant. If we went bottom, there's really no marginal benefit. So, I think I'd rather go growth 3 top, right? Go growth 3 top, and then growth 1, and then growth 2 bottom. To get our 3 card plays plus 2 energy with the plant would allow us to access our 3rd level innate. And that's when we get to 3 fear a turn, and that's really nice. And that would happen on turn 5? That's pretty spicy. If our situation's kind of desperate, we could go for a reclaim on turn 3. However, considering that we should have everything locked down on the first 2 turns, it's probably to our benefit to eat a blight just to get that extra presence out, that extra card out, that card gained. So that's if we explore into a building. And if the opening explore has no buildings, then we could probably go growth 2 top, okay, and then play Mysterious in order to pick off one of the opening explorers. And then turn 2, we could do growth 3 bottom, and then play kind of anything we want, right? Because we're going to be able to, any 2 cards from our starting hand, we will be able to access our top level innate, right? The defend 2 will be sufficient against a single town and explorer. That'll bring in the Dahans, that'll kill the town. So, that kind of turns into a free turn. So really it would be probably Whispered Guide to set up. There's a 2/3 chance that we're exploring into a land with a building. So we probably want to start setting up for that. And, we could do Eerie Noise. I could do Eerie Noise or the new card. Okay, but let's just say we did Eerie Noise. Okay, so that means that going into turn 3, the Ravage, there would be a 6 damage Ravage. Let's just say we explored into a land with the building, and that's the one that we targeted with Whispered Guidance. And then Eerie Noise just solves the other land. So that's nothing to worry about. So then here, we would have 2 cards in hand, it might be beneficial to just do another growth 2 bottom, and then play Boon and basically everything. So Boon plus others. Basically just play out our hand and then set ourselves up for a reclaim. And we'd be reclaiming with 2 energy per turn and 3 cards per turn with just an air. So that could be a slightly worse position. Right, because we have none of the free plants, so we'd only be able to get the defend 4 and the 1 fear. But that's, 3 cards in, right? That's your 3 stage 1 cards. So you're just getting into stage 2. They're not quite hitting super hard yet. So that seems like a pretty smooth opening to me. Because then from there you could, probably... right, because by the time that turn 4 comes around, we'll have gained some 10 energy. Right, 2, 2, 2, 2 off of the energy track. And then 2 more from our growth options, having only spent 3 or 4 energy. So heck, we might even gain a major here. And if we gain a major, we'd probably pitch this Mysterious Abductions, because that's going to lose us a lot of value over the course of the game. It gets incrementally weaker. Huh. That's an option. Yeah, I'd be interested to see if you could actually pick up a major. And that's something cheap, right? A 2 or 3 cost, just a little something to give you a little oomph, just to help you be less reliant on defense. Something small would be nice. But really, it comes down to how the explorers go. Because since we're defending, we're inherently reacting. And that is the problem with these defensive spirits, is that you're forced to react to what the invaders do. You can't dictate the pace of the game. You can't just choose to destroy certain lands and then isolate land number 8 because there's no adjacent buildings to it. We have to just hope that the deck comes up in the right order. And because we're reliant on Dahan, if all of our Dahan winds up, on the left side of the board and the Explorer goes to the right side of the board, we could be SOL for that reason as well. And depending on certain boards, being restricted to 1 range away from a jungle for our Whispered Guidance could also lead to some lands not being able to be effectively Dahan counterattacked. But with all those caveats, Eyes Watch should be able to deal with most things. So goals with card game, patching the weaknesses with elements. We have perfect elements here. So we don't necessarily need elements coming off of cards in order to hit our higher level stuff. Obviously, anything with a grass we would like. But besides that, our elements aren't going to be too picky. Certainly, any kind of push control we would really like. Damage is nice too, but there's not going to be a ton of powerful damage coming out of the Minor Powers deck. With less energy gain and the dead spot on the top track, I can see us less likely to go for energy and stick more with minors. And there's not a ton of big damage abilities coming out of the minors deck. So really I'd be looking for control there. And then expected results versus adversaries. So against Prussia... this could actually be a tough matchup for us because on turn 1, if they have the stage 3 card, we can, right? So that they will explore into a building, right? There's really no when you're hitting 2 different land types, you're almost always going to explore into a land with a building, because they start with 3 different lands with buildings. So. Mysterious, right? That can pick up whatever is not in land with a building, right? And then Prussia has no way of recovering from that. And then Whispered Guide and then Defense will be able to solve 2 out of the land. So we'd probably be taking 2 Blight right off the gate. And then, since we're reliant on the way the Invader deck goes, anything could happen. This is going to be an unreliable matchup for us where maybe, right, we just happen to keep on hitting jungles over and over and over again, and then we just win, or we just hit different lands over and over and over again, and we can't really gain control of anything because they're too widespread. So this one is inconsistent. Just gonna be based on the invader deck. Sweden is the defense killer since they do the extra damage on the Ravage. This could be bad for us. Additionally, Sweden's really good at picking off small, quantities of Dahan. And so when we keep on splitting up our Dahan by only moving one at a time with our special rule, that means that we're way more likely to get hit with Sweden stage 2. So this could actually also be a really bad matchup for us. We're going to basically always be defending 8 with Boon. Because if there's any 2 buildings whatsoever, then the defend 4 is not good enough. And Sweden starts with 4 lands with buildings. So that's going to, they hit super hard up front, and that's when we're going to be weakest. So this is a bad matchup for us. And this is also just going to take a lot of luck. And we're going to have to draft some control. Yeah, so we're going to need to draft control against these guys. Defense just isn't going to be good enough, and there's not enough damage in the minor power deck, right? You might pick up like a 1 damage or a 2 damage from time to time, but inconsistently, so we can't rely on that either. Control is what we can mostly rely on. So that's going to be a super hard matchup for us. Then we have England. England starts off really slow, and then they just continually beat down. I think England's actually going to be a strong matchup for us because we can move so much Dahan, right? We have hitbacks for 8, right? 3 Dahan from the Whispered plus 1 from the special rule. So, us picking off 2 cities, we have all of our innate fear, so we're not going to have to worry about England's 6 double builds. This one can definitely be a good matchup for us. The event deck could really screw us. But, we have a little bit of town push with eerie noises. Mysterious Seductions, right, it's trash, right? It can go away almost immediately. You might get lucky with a random build prevention in the very early game if they opening Explore into land 8, and there's only 1 adjacent town, then you can pop it. But that's the only time you're ever going to be able to use it. So against England, we might wind up just getting ourselves up to 3 card plays and then going up to 4 energy and trying to pull majors. But I actually think this will be a good matchup for us just because with our starting hand and our innate, we can hit a fear card every single turn. We got France. France, with all of the Dahan movement, it is super easy for us to set up for good slave rebellions. If we can draft any kind of strife, then it just becomes an absolute blowout, right? You can set up Whispered Guidance in 1 land, use your innate, tee up another land. Easy stuff. Because France tends to hit really hard 1 land at a time, I actually think this will be a strong matchup for us because we can put up a lot of defense as well, right? With their stage 2, right? Double Explorer plus a town from stage 2. You build that, you have a city, 2 towns and Explorer, you're hitting for 8, right? Well, Boon of Watchful Guardian, defends for 8, pulls in some Dahan, right? Pick off those towns. It should be pretty easy to prevent things from getting too out of control. The only thing that can go wrong with this is, once again, the invader deck. What if we happen to have 3 towns in the wetlands and the wetlands just never comes up again? Then we have no way of destroying them. So you might have to do something interesting, like use eerie noises to move the towns into a land that's about the Ravage, just so that way we can knock them down with the Dahan. So everything we've got here should be able to effectively deal with France. But any kind of build prevention is good. Mysterious Abductions will be fantastic here. It won't completely stop a build, but being able to prevent an entire town from existing is significant by picking off one of those explorers. So we're going to look for draft control. But otherwise, I think France should be one of our better matchups. Habsburg. Habsburg, like France, hits really hard one land at a time, but the difference is that we need Blight to come down in order to actually be able to fight back and kill off the towns. So that's actually going to be tricky for us. And it'll completely change our opening because all of a sudden we don't care about adding Blight for the first turn or two. We're just trying to not take 8 damage Blights, so Eerie Noises becomes a lot better. And we're just trying to keep our Dahan alive until we set up for the mid-game in stage 2 is when we can actually start fighting back. So we kind of just chill out and do nothing in the early game. And so I'm going to say that we want to set up to scale against Habsburg. Right, just let them do their thing for the first 2 turns or so, and then get ready to use Whispered Guidance to pull in all your Dahan, huge defends, and try and let them destroy themselves in the mid game. It is going to be tough though because they can hit incredibly hard. Being able to defend 8 with Boon is fantastic, but we're probably going to have to use Boon and our Innate both in a single land to protect ourselves. At which point we're still going to be taking Blight in the other land. So we're going to be setting up to scale, and we might even want a little bit of Blight removal, which is normally not what you want against Habsburg, but we struggle to deal with multiple lands simultaneously, and Habsburg is very durable. Mysterious Abductions is trash, right? It's not going to be very good. We can certainly get a little bit of value out of it in the early game, but once you got a bunch of towns all over the place, you're going to be getting those double town builds, and Mysterious Abductions just stops being valuable. Next is Russia. Russia is going to be a very difficult matchup for us because while we do produce a lot of fear early, we struggle to deal with those small numbers of buildings early. Certainly Mysterious Abductions can prevent the whole series of events, and it's, produces 2 fear instead of 1. However, getting into that mid game, where since we struggle to deal with a lot of Dahan effectively, struggle to deal with a lot of Explorers effectively, since it requires so much more defense for just less results, this is going to be a tough one for us. So for these guys, we have to, I'm going to say it's going to be inconsistent, and it's going to be reliant on the invader deck, similar to Prussia. We want the very first Explorer to go into the land with the building in it. So that way, we can set up with a Boon of Watchful Guarding, set up the Dahan, and hopefully deny a few Explorers at the very beginning of the game, just with a lucky, stacking of the invader deck. But with Russia, since we're going to be struggling to deal with these Explorers, right, like we have no way to kill Explorers here. So once we get to that mid game, once they put Explorers just everywhere, we're going to be very overwhelmed. So we want to be inconsistent, and we really need to get very far ahead early. After just like 2 stage 2 escalations, I think we're in for a rough time against Russia. And then lastly is Scotland. I think Scotland will be a great matchup for us because they don't have extra damage. They have extra durability, right, by being able to have the coastal builds and being able to have the level 6 with the inlands. Right, so they'll be very durable, and they'll be consistently there, and they'll be consistently hitting you, but they're not going to hit in too many lands all at the same time, and they don't really have any way of just like destroying our Dahan or anything like that. They're just consistent, resilient, durable, but so are we. So I think Scotland will be a great matchup for us. The only thing that I would say here is that we want to set ourselves up to scale, because we're not going to get... You can't get a fast victory against Scotland. They have something like 5 fear cards at level 1. And so it's impossible to hit Terra level 2 very early. Even with a fear guy like this, right? There's just too much going on. So we want to set up to scale. But I think Scotland should be a great matchup for us. So England, France, Habsburg, Scotland, those will be our good matchups. Prussia could be, it might not be, but Sweden and Russia is going to be a whole lot of pain. Up next, we have Devouring Teeth, Lurk, Underfoot. Special rule here is your damage dealing powers do +1 damage. Alright, well that suggests to me this guy's going to be doing a lot of offense. Growth options, growth 1, reclaim, add a presence. Okay, usually that's reserved for like defensive spirits, being able to add a presence on reclaim, and his damage dealing powers do +1 damage, which suggests offense, so that's a bit unusual. But anyways, growth 2, add a presence at range 1, and gain a power card, and then growth 3 is add a presence at range 2, gain 3 energy. So very simple growth options. No one growth option does too much. Every growth option adds a presence, and none of them give you excessive range, right? Adding 2 range and then 3 energy is nice. As much as possible, I always like to try and gain as many power cards to minimize my time between reclaims. But since this guy adds a presence on reclaim, all of a sudden that's not as big of a concern. So right off the bat, it's a little outside my wheelhouse. Not usually the type of spirits that I enjoy to play. But let's take a look at his presence tracks. Starting at 2, working his way up to 7 energy. So that suggests to me he wants major powers. Right? If you can pull 7 energy a turn, you can throw down some big cards. And then being able to add a presence on reclaim means that, in theory, you could just go top track, pick up some huge game-winning major, and then literally play it every turn for the rest of the game while still scaling. So that's exciting. Card play starts at 1, works its way up to 4. So way less card plays than there is energy. Absolutely pushes you towards playing majors. Every single presence that you add does give you some marginal benefit, right? There's tons of elements in his tracks. So since you add a presence every turn, you do get incrementally stronger every single turn, no matter what decision you make. Let's go down to that innate. Death approaches from beneath the surface. Slow, 1 range, has to target a land with invaders. If you don't have presence in target land, gather one of your presence. Interesting. So I previously said that he doesn't have a ton of mobility with his growth options, but he has mobility with his innate. So I guess that plays into a theme. This is like some kind of like underground serpent. Right? He moves into a land with invaders and just like pops up. He's like, gotcha. Also, actually, that makes his adding a presence at range 0 even better. Because if you were to keep doing that over and over without the ability to move your presence, you would wind up with like 4 presence in a single land. And you never want to have that, right? That's a waste. So that's really interesting. And then, let's see, going down, it's just more damage when you have certain elements, and then 2 fear at the top level. So because you have the extra 1 damage from your special rule, it basically says at tier 1 you do 2 damage, at tier 2 you do 4 damage, and tier 3 you do 8 damage. I guess all of those is not tier 2, 3, 4, but that first tier is whatever. Okay, interesting. So let's take a look at his cards. First thing I notice is none of his cards cost 0. So you're really going to be pushed towards going down the top track because you can't just get extra card plays and not put tons of strain on your energy gain. So we have 2 cost, mark territory with scars and teeth. Range 0, defend 9. And then 2 fear if invaders are present, and push 2 Dahan. So having being forced to push Dahan away while you're defending basically says that this defend is just here to kill time. You can't gain an advantage with this, by using Dahan and defend simultaneously, because it removes the Dahan, so you lose the ability to fight back. 2 fear is nice, but at 2 cost, it's a lot of defend for 2 cost, but I think this card's almost a bit of a trap, right? Defend 9 looks really nice, but it doesn't actually help you win the game. It just helps you kill time. Let's see, it has 2 of your elements. It's missing fire. Okay, herd towards the lurking maw. 1 cost slow, range 0, produces a fear, and then it gathers an explorer or a town. Has the same elements, right? It's missing fire. This is cool, right? Because your innate, right, is kind of like dealing damage at range 0 since you gather a presence into that land. But you could pull in a town from an adjacent land and then destroy it. I can imagine that this guy would have excessive damage because of his +1 damage. So, if you have an extra 1 damage, pick off an extra explorer. If you have an extra 2 damage, pick off an extra town. That's a really nice way to help clear the board. Right? Being able to effectively solve 2 lands at the same time. All right, Gift of Furious Might. This one has fire animal but no earth. 1 cost fast. Targets another spirit. And target spirit may deal +3 damage this turn with one of its damage dealing powers. Okay, so you can help a teammate deal extra damage. That's interesting. I believe, let me check, compare that to Heart of the Wildfire. Because it's deal with one of its damage dealing powers. And I believe Heart of the Wildfire makes you deal +1 damage with all of your powers with his unique card, Flame's Fury. And so, specifically what I'm thinking about is the interaction with green and Flame's Fury. Like, Heart of the Wildfire plus green's a fantastic combo because Flame's Fury on green makes each of your left innate deal 2 damage per layer. And I would have to check the rules. This might deal 4 damage on the first one and then 1 damage thereafter. But either way, ultimately, Gift of Furious might as well just read 1 energy, destroy a city. That's nuts. A lot of spirits struggle with destroying cities. And so just having a card that just says, like, all right, just 3 damage, kill a city in addition to whatever else you were planning on doing, that is wild. And then Furious Rampage, 2 cost slow, fire animal, 0 range. Okay, 1 fear, and then deal 3 damage to explorers and towns only. And ultimately does 4 damage because of your special rule. So what's interesting about this is that's actually the only way that you can deal damage and use your special rule besides your innate. That also combos really nicely with your other slow card, Hero Lurking, right? Because it's always better to kill towns than explorers. So you could use Hero Lurking to gather a town in, and then use Furious Rampage to kill off both towns. So they each innately produce a fear, plus the 2 towns you destroy, so that's 4 fear. But the face value of the cards that you have produces 4 fear. That's a significant amount of fear. That's a whole fear card, so that's really good. But the lack of damage dealing powers is significant. So this really tells me that you're going to have to use Growth 2 a lot and draft damage dealing cards. You're certainly incentivized to go into majors, but in the early game, you always want to pick up a few minors anyways. If for no other reason, you have something to forget for a future major. There's not a lot of minors that deal damage, and if they do, it only deals 1 or 2. However, with Devouring Teeth, that 1 extra damage is significant. The margin of 1 damage to 2 damage on a single power is huge. Killing an Explorer with 1 damage, it's whatever, right? You might get away with preventing a build, but killing a town means you have to be less preventative, and you don't have to be so lucky by exploring into lands with nothing in it at the same time that you played a 1 damage card. So this is great, right? It allows you to turn all these cards, which might be kind of weak on their own, and just adding 1 damage to each and every card is fantastic. If this guy had tons of card plays, I could see him going for a major minors, or not major minor, a lot of minors build in order to hit that special rule 3, 4, 5 times in a single turn. But since it takes so much work to get yourself extra card plays, I mean, you have to, it's going to take you 4 turns before you can even get your 3rd card play out. You're very clearly being pushed towards majors. So the majors, there are tons of majors that deal damage. There's, I mean, it's got to be at least half the major power deck does damage. And so that means every single time you gain a major, you're probably going to find something that you can use to make use of your special rule. So just with the incentives that are presented to you, you're probably going to want to pick up the 2nd card play early and then just run it straight down the top track. So let us consider some, openings. Well, I guess also I have written down here that you look at card combos to hit your innates. But, I mean, let's be real here, right? You're not going to be going bottom track to hit your innates. Like, you're probably not even going to wind up doing 3 card plays. You're going to wind up at 2. You might come here just to pick up an element that you're not able to draft to effectively. But, I mean, even then, right, your first one that you gain here is an animal, and every single one of your starting cards has an animal. And you require an equal number of fire and animal. So that pulls you towards the top track, right? Because that has the fire immediately. So, yeah, really we're looking at 2 cards to be able to hit your innates. Maybe you go like 2 cards, then you pick up the animal on the bottom track and the fire on the top track, which will give you access to the higher damage, your 2nd level innate, right? Because then you could do like, well, actually, you don't even have any cards that give you all 3 elements. So with 2 cards, you cannot hit your 2nd level innate with the extra 2 damage. Right? You would have to play something like Herd. You have to play something like Herd lurking towards the Lurking Maw. You'd have to play something like Ferocious Rampage. And that will, let's see, that's 1 fire, 1 earth, 2 animals. Okay, so let's just say you went, right, like top, bottom, right? So you'd be at 2 fire, 3 animals, and an earth, right? That still wouldn't be enough here, right? So you would have to go pick up 3 of your elements and then play those 2 cards just to get the extra 2 damage on that innate. So that innate is probably not going to happen a heck of a lot. This makes me think he's a little bit like Vital Strength of the Earth, where you occasionally, periodically hit your top level innate, but you really never plan around it, and you really just kind of don't worry about your elements so much. Certainly you have enough elements here on your tracks that, in the case of a coin flip, you can always pick a card that gives you the elements that you want, such that you're more likely to hit that innate. But, I mean, otherwise, you might just be playing just straight cards here and just, you might wind up drafting the cards such that you pick up something like Tsunami, right, with the triple water requirement, and then you threshold it. Maybe not triple water with only 2 card plays, but you know what I'm trying to get at here. You're not necessarily pigeonholed into fire animal cards. But anyways, so offense, clearly you have great offensive ability with all of your offensive cards doing more damage. It's just a matter of getting them. Control, there is no control here, right? The only control you have is a gather, which I get the sense that really tees you up more for dealing damage at range 0. But, I mean, it is control, and you can use it to prevent, like to gather and explore and prevent a build chain and all that. Or you can gather a town so you don't need to worry about defending a land. But control is really not good. You have 1 card, which is pretty weak. Fear. You do have 4 fear in your starting cards, so that's really strong. But you're never going to hit that innate fear. So we can largely ignore that, right? You need to basically max out your entire presence tracks in order to hit that. But the four fear from your starting cards is very strong, and a push towards more offense will allow you to destroy more, which will allow you to produce more fear. Defense. So we do have a defend 9 in our starting grip. However, since it actually pushes away the Dahan instead of gathering Dahan, it's nice, but it is not the game-winning move. So our defense is not very strong. The support, give and receive. Definitely, we have a little bit of support that we can give. Being able to just give people free city kills is nice. That kind of ability can help someone else clear their board very quickly. Helps them deal with really big built-up lands. But receiving, we're definitely going to want to receive some support. Clearly, we're going to be starting off very weak. We're going to be starting off very slow. But if we can receive some good support in the early game, once we get to high energy gains, pick up a few majors, right? We can play this every single turn because we had presence on reclaim. We're going to be crushing it in the late game. This is absolutely a late game major power carry. So we want to receive a lot of support early such that we can just win the game for the team later. And then Dahan's an F, right? All we can do is push Dahan. We can't gather Dahan. We don't really have like good effective Dahan manipulation. And since our defense gets rid of the Dahan, and all that's in one card, right? Like that's all of our Dahan movement. We really can't do anything with Dahan, so we largely ignore it. So this guy is definitely our late game scaling carry. So with that in mind, let's consider our openings, understanding that we're probably going to have to take some blight early, just to deal with it. So, since we don't have any card that produces all three of our elements, we cannot deal damage on turn. We cannot use our innate on turn 1, right? We can't deal any damage. So, therefore, we don't really have to plan around trying to hit our thresholds early. On turn 1, certainly our 2 slow cards are the ones that we'd be looking for. So if we explore into a land, if the opening explorer has goes into a land with a building, we'll probably just want to grow into that land and then hit it with marked territory and just give it the defend 9 and just kind of wait for that card to come around the next cycle before dealing with it again. That land type to come up in the next stage before we have to deal with it again. But if we explore into lands that are just explorers, we can deal with them, right? We can gather the town out with herd lurking, or we can take the offensive route by going for ferocious rampage. And of the two, I think going offensive is just better than going for the slow control route. Certainly, we could go for something like, grow 3 and then go bottom and then play herd and rampage, right? And then that will be able to gather the that will solve both of those lands. So we don't need to deal with anything. But then we're left with a defend with no target because we've already solved everything. And then we have gift, which that's completely dependent upon one of our teammates doing something. And in solo play, it does literally nothing because we already played our only we already played our only damage dealing card, right? We could play those two together with the fire from the top track, and that would allow us to deal 1 damage, right? So with the special rule and with the gift, that would be dealing 5 damage. So that's not bad, but I'm sure we can do better. So I'm inclined to believe that the best thing that we can do on turn 1 is to go for growth 2. And we'll go... and then depending on what we get, we could go top, we could go bottom. But I'm pretty interested in scaling right now. So I would go top track, right? And then, unless if there's a very specific situation, we could probably solve one of the two lands with either Herd or Ferocious. So just depends on the situation, but we're restricted with only one range growth, and we only start with one presence on the board. I don't know where it starts. So it really comes down to the exact situation on the board. If we can get the Ferocious Rampage, that's better. But I'm just going to put down Herd just because that's more reliant. Because that effectively hits something at 2 range, right? You grow 1 range away, and then, or I guess actually it's 3, right? So you could grow 1 range away, use the innate to move yourself 1 away, right? You can move a presence into a land with invaders, and then you can pull a town from 1 land away, right? So Herd is guaranteed to be able to pull a town out of any land, no matter what your starting position is, because on a solo board, everything is 3 away or less from each other. But since we can also consider that extra presence movement, most likely we can do it with Ferocious Rampage. So I'm going to put down Rampage here. So we'll have 0 energy, 1 card play at the end of this, right? We'll gain a fear. We'll be able to kill, right, Explorer in a town, in a land, and then life goes on. The other land, we will likely let it just blight, right? But really now we're at a decision point. If we want to go for marked territory and protect ourselves, or if we can, save another land with Herd. We could, once again, go for growth 3 and play both Mark and Herd, but it's really hard to visualize what it could be because there are so many different ways that this could go. So this is definitely a spirit that every single game that you play is going to be different, and no set opening is really going to work for you. I'm just going to go ahead and go for growth 2 top, and then I'm just going to put down Mark as the next card to play. So that will protect. So Furious Rampage will solve one of the lands, and then Mark will defend the other, so will not have taken any blight after the first Ravage of the game. Going into the next turn, we're looking at taking 2 blight, though. The alternative is maybe if we could make Hero work, we could take 1 blight now and then 1 blight next turn. But either way, it looks like we're just going to be taking 2 blight. Another thing to consider, though, is maybe we take that 1 blight, we go growth 2, and we go bottom. Okay, we gain 2 energy, and then we play Herd, and then we play Gift. Okay, so there we take 1 blight from the Ravage. We can use Herd to solve one of the lands that will be coming up on our second Ravage, and then Gift to help out a teammate. Right? You could do this if a teammate is playing a damage dealing card. So it's entirely contextual based on what your teammates are doing, which will really determine what you're going to be doing. If you're doing this solo, by doing this combination, we do gain access to our first damage dealing innate because we'll have 2 fire, 1 earth, and 2 animals. And so this could be a great choice if the third, if we're looking at a land that starts with a building, because it'll build and it'll have an explorer, town, and a city. The 1 damage plus the special rule plus the gift is 5 damage, and it'll knock everything down to just a single explorer, which will not blight. So that's really powerful. And then Herd, maybe we could use that to pull in an explorer from some other land to prevent a future build. right? Because whatever the other land that would be ravaging, right, we solve one with the damage, then we could defend the other one with Mark. That's exciting, right? So then the cool thing about this is that we can gain a power card every turn, and we have just enough energy to pull everything off, right? So we could do something like Growth 2 top, and then play Mark, and then some other card. By this point, we'll have drafted 3 more cards. We'll either have done 3 minors or 2 minors, and then maybe this is the turn that we pick up a major. If we do that, though, we'd have only 1 energy left, and so we wouldn't be able to play the major anyways. So I'd say for the first 3 turns, we probably just want to pick up 3 minors, and then the next turn we could do like Growth 2 top, picking up a major, and then alright, so we'd have something like this. Right, playing Mark plus any minor. All minors cost 0 or 1, so we know we're going to have the energy for it. And then going into our 4th turn, we'll have gained 4 energy. So we'll either have 4 or 5 energy, and that'll allow us to play most, like, it's really hard to imagine that you'd be pulling majors and then not have a card that you can play of all those majors in front of you. I believe like the top of the bell curve for the major cost distribution is at 4. So any major, and hopefully you've picked up some 0 cost minors. Any 0 cost minor will work. So one of these 2 minors needs to be 0 cost in order for us to have enough energy to do it, assuming a 4 energy major. There's tons of great major powers, though, that cost less. One of the very best majors we could possibly pick up would be Angry Bears. Not one that's necessarily common or popular, but threshold is off of Fire and Animal. If you pick up Angry Bears, I believe it only costs 3, so you could actually go bottom track just to pick up the extra animal. So as long as you pick up any minor power that has an animal, you can threshold Angry Bears immediately, and then probably just threshold it every turn for the rest of the game. So that's just a really nice way to do a whole lot of extra damage. But there's tons of great damage dealing cards that are cheap. So it's really hard for me to keep on going with this, but probably by this point, probably want to just go for a Growth 1, go top. That would get us an animal. So if we went bottom here, we'd go top here. If we go top here, then we just go top again. So either way, we'd wind up going top here, and then either way, we'd wind up with an animal, right? So if we just go exactly as I have here, we'll have 4 energy and the animal on the top track. If you went bottom for a second, then we'd have 4 energy, and we pick up the animal off the bottom track. And then, yeah, everything with this guy is going to be contextual. This one's going to be really hard to decide how good he is. Absolutely, he's a major power slinger. It's not the way that I tend to play. But of the major power slingers, I think he's going to be pretty good. Major powers, you typically pick those up to be big damage dealing powers to help you actually win the game, which plays right into his special rule. So, how do we expect that he would do versus certain adversaries? Against Prussia, woof. We're gonna get spanked. It seems like Devouring Teeth opened really slow. And with 4 lands getting hit right off the bat, we are very likely to just blight out on turn 1. I mean, let's see, we could open up with Rampage and, clean up one of the lands, and then we would just have to play Mark second. There's no way around it. We just have to. So we'd probably wind up just going top, play Mark second, just so we can survive a turn. Otherwise we just won't have or we might wind up actually having to do like Growth 3, bottom track, play Mark plus Herd. So that way we have the extra the dealing with one of the other lands. But yeah, Prussia is just going to be a bad matchup, right? It's going to be just absolute luck of the draw. Luck of the draw with powers. So we would really need something like Sap, a 0-cost defend 5, right? Like that's probably like the single best card that we could possibly get on turn 1. Just because Prussia hits you fast, and Teeth is going to take a long time to get going. Sweden. This is going to be another tough matchup. Sweden also hits you insanely fast, right? Where they start with half the board with buildings. The buildings deal extra damage. When they blight, they add extra build. It's just a mess right out the gate. So certainly marked territory is incredibly important, and we might wind up just like reclaiming a bunch at the beginning and just play marked territory over and over again, just to try and survive the early game until we finally can get enough presence out to gain the energy to like do stuff. But woof, Sweden's going to be a rough matchup as well. Also, without any Dahan control, right? 2 of the lands start with Dahan, just a single Dahan. And so those ones, once you hit stage 2, just immediately flip into extra buildings. Sweden's going to be a terrible matchup for Devouring Teeth. So this one's definitely going to be a luck of the draw as well. It just, we have to really hope to pull some good lucky powers early. Maybe we pick up a major like Pent-Up Calamity, so that we can strife off a town or, add a disease to prevent things from happening. Like if they go into land 2, stripe off the city, and then put a disease down to prevent the next town from being built, or, same situation with one of the inland towns or inland city. Yeah, Pent-Up Calamity would be really strong for Sweden. Let's see. Then England. England starts a lot slower. So this is definitely more in our wheelhouse. England builds up nice and slow, and in the mid-game they get going, and the same thing's going to be true for us. By the time England hits stage 2, we're going to start pulling majors, and we're going to have, 4 energy gain a turn. Pretty soon we're going to be hitting 6 energy gain a turn. I can't imagine the going from 6 to 7 energy is better than advancing the card plays track, but picking up those elements and stuff to start dealing damage. The extra 1 damage from our special rule is significant, since that completely negates England 5. That 1 extra health usually just blanks so many cards, but with Devouring Teeth, it's fine, right? It just kind of negates our special rule, but that's okay, right? If we hit our level 2 threshold for our innate, it still kills a city. So England should definitely be a better matchup for us, and we're just going to need to draft into majors and, really take our time. So just focus on scaling. Take some blight early, right? Do what you got to do. Hit that growth 2 as much as you possibly can, and just keep on digging for heavy hitters. France, Ferocious Rampage is going to be insane for France, because France tends to put a lot of towns into single lands. Just playing Ferocious Rampage with no support whatsoever kills 2 towns for 2 energy, and that's great value. So France might not be so bad for us. We'd probably open up with a hero on turn 1, right? Because that's really the only turn we're gathering a single town. We'll be able to prevent a blight. For the rest of the game, Hero Turns to Lurking Maw is like just loses a lot of value. Really, you can only use it to tee up other damage dealing powers. But at the very first turn of the game, you can actually gain a little bit of value from it, preventing a blight. Ferocious Rampage is going to be huge. That's going to help us survive the early game. And then just like everything else, just gotta keep on digging. Using Mark to set up a Slaves Rebellion, it's not bad, right? Just make sure we use the Mark on the 3rd turn of the game, so that way we can fully defend whatever land we're on, and then push 2 Dahan into another land that has a town, right? That'll get us a little bit of value out of it, but not much there. France hits for 8 during the mid game, and so we have a defend 9. So France probably is not going to be too bad of a matchup for us, right? They just put a lot into individual lands, and we can also deal a lot of damage in just single lands at a time. So that should be a good matchup for us. It's just a matter of focus on Explorer control. Since France 6 is stronger against fear cards, having extra fear, having a good amount of fear in our starting grip is not necessarily a great benefit. Okay, next we have Habsburg. Habsburg, once again, just stacks tall in individual lands. We are very happy to let them blight early, right? We can just use our marked territory whenever they put a little bit too much of one land or they're threatening an 8 damage. But besides that, I think Habsburg should be a good matchup for us, right? Because they incentivize you to kind of do nothing early, and we really don't want to do anything early. So for Habsburg, we're looking for Habsburg, we don't really care about defense, right? So we just want to focus on scaling. Similar to England, right? Russia. Russia's gonna suck for us. The one thing we have going for Russia, though, is that Ferocious Rampage can pick off a whole bunch of explorers in one shot. So that's really the way that we could make sure that we don't just drown under all the explorers, is by getting all the explorers into a single land and then just, killing a whole bunch of them. If we only ever deal 1 damage at a time, then Russia explorers run you over. But since Ferocious Rampage can kill 3 explorers and then fear and push a 4th explorer, that's not so bad. Set ourselves up right on top of a beast, and then we can just keep on stage 2 escalating right onto our face, and then just keep on clearing them out. I could see that going pretty good for us. So, let's see. Russia, set up and defend beast token. Right? This is once again like where we can just keep on reclaiming and just keep on playing Ferocious Rampage. Right? That's we can protect ourselves from that runaway explorer thing. Right, so we want to find ways to gather explorers. Yeah. Right, because if we can do that, then we can really effectively and efficiently clear them out. We don't have the ability to win super fast, right? We don't have any way of destroying that city early game. But hopefully we can draft something early enough such that we can pick off that city, right? Any 2 damage minor will kill the city. And so we have the tools, we could possibly set up for an early stage 2 victory. But since we get so much stronger over the course of the game, well, Russia does too, this one's going to be a toss-up. I can see it going either way. It really comes down to how sturdy can we set ourselves up. Last is Scotland. Scotland, I think this will be a good matchup for us. They right around the time where they're going to be flipping over the coastal card, we're going to be at that 4 energy, 2 card plays, maybe a couple elements point. And so that's when we're starting to play the majors. That's when we're starting to do a lot more stuff. I think we are very vulnerable to the additional loss condition early, since we don't have any easy way of dealing with cities early. So we have to be very careful about that. But otherwise, I think Scotland should be manageable, but we really need to focus on scaling against these guys. Definitely take some blights early, but because Scotland is so resilient over the course of the long game, we want to really build up a whole fistful of cards and just try and, once we get into that mid game, we're just going to be playing nothing but damage cards, right? We might get the occasional defend. We'll probably save our defend 9 only for the coastal lands, just so we don't get the double blight. We'll probably let the inlands blight pretty freely. But definitely, once we get past the coastal, before we get into the stage 3 cards, that should be the tipping point for us, where we should be able to, destroy from there. But yeah, Devouring Teeth, probably not going to be a spirit I play a ton of all these. I tend to enjoy minors over majors. He's interesting, right? I mean, I guess I love to play Bringer of Dreams and Nightmares, and he's a major power slinger, right? He keeps you stuck at 2 card plays and, lots of elements, and hits the, high amounts of energy gain. So maybe we could see how this one goes, but this one's probably going to be my least favorite of all of them in this set. All right, next spirit we have here is Rising Heat of Stone and Sand. So, special rule, Blistering Heat. At your sacred sites, invaders have -1 health, down to a minimum of 1. That's insane. Okay, so growth options. First one is to reclaim, power card, and energy. Growth 2 adds 2 presence, range 3, but only into a mountains and sands. So, like, Rising Heat of Stone and Sand, right? Hey, that's thematic. And Growth 3 gives you a power card, a presence, and 2 energy. So that gives you quite a bit. And notably, that allows you to put a presence into a jungles or a wetlands, where you can't go with Growth 2. So pretty clearly, right off the bat, it's going to be easy to get sacred sites into mountains and sands. And so our special rule will apply there a lot more, and it's going to be a lot harder to get those into jungles and wetlands, so it's going to be a lot harder to have control over those lands. So that could give us different incentives, right? Maybe we'd want to play a card that deals, there's a lot of minor powers that deal a lot of damage, or major powers that deal a lot of damage, but only to like jungles and wetlands. So it might be good to pick those up because that's where we're weaker, because I'm sure we'll have other tools to deal with the mountains and sands pretty readily. But that's just a noticeable weakness. Having a double presence growth is fantastic, but growth 3 gives you everything. So there's no clear, super powerful growth option here, right? The balance between 2 and 3 is going to be a thing that we're going to look at when we get to our considered possible openings. But coming down to the presence track, so both energy and card place start at 1 and top out at 5. There is a low point, right? A weak point on the plays track, right? Where you have 2 and then 2 again. So that does give you a bit of an incentive to go towards the top track, right? Because every single presence gives you a marginal benefit there. Okay. But that first energy gives you an earth as opposed to a second energy. So I guess that comes down to how good the innates are. So let's go there next. Innate power, Scorch with waves of heat. Slow, range 1 from its sacred site, which we're pretty capable of getting whenever we want. And let's see. Tier 1 is 2 damage to explorers only. Okay, and that is fire and wind. Okay, 2 of each. Then from there, it's just damage, and then damage to everything. Okay, cool. So everything requires fire, and we require more fire than anything else. That's our absolute priority, with wind and earth both being secondary, wind topping out at 2 and earth at 3. All right, so let's take a look at your starting powers. First, we have Sweltering Exhaustion. It is a 2-cost fast power, range 2 from a sacred site, 1 fear, and skip up to 1 ravage or build action. Okay, cool. Next, fire, which we need the most of, and wind. Okay, no earth there. Stopping a ravage is always nice, but stopping a build is usually even better than stopping a ravage. Even though we're pretty good at, like being able to prevent buildings from being around because, they all have 1 less health. Just having it not there in the first place is pretty nice, but 2 cost, it's a little bit much to get started with. Anyways, next we have a 1-cost slow power. Call on Herders for aid. Gives us fire and earth, no wind. Okay, slow to range, gather up to 2 Dahan, and then for each Dahan present, push up to 1 explorer, town, or Dahan. So interesting that you can use this to gather Dahan and then immediately push Dahan. So if you have a land that already has a couple Dahan in it, you could gather even more in and then push all of them somewhere else. Or you could use it as a control power, right? Where you could gather some Dahan in, move some guys out. You could use that to prevent builds. It's pretty good. So we have 2 cards now that allow you to prevent builds. Next we have Gift of Searing Heat. 0 cost, fast, gives you fire and wind, and must target another spirit. That spirit can gain 2 energy, or they can pay energy to do 1 damage in one of their lands. So I typically play solo, so that will absolutely change your build order. If you give yourself 2 energy, you can go straight across the bottom track and not have to go top track. But at the same time, this could be a 3rd card that prevents a build from happening. So that is very interesting. I mean, also, we have our innate, which deals damage to explorers. So I'm clearly seeing a theme here that buildings aren't going to come up in the first place. And then when they do come up, they have -1 health. So this guy seems insanely powerful right off the get-go. Just, comes out lots of aggression and control. Anyways, last we have Stinging Sandstorm, and this is the only power of ours that has all 3 of our elements. Cost 1, slow, range 1, gather 1 of your presence, do a fear and a damage. And then it has a note that says it creates a sacred site, so invaders will have less health. So the thing that's interesting about this is it can target any land. So I had said previously we're going to be able to get sacred sites into mountains and sands, but we will not be able to easily get sacred sites into wetlands and jungles. But by using this power card, we can use Growth 3 to put a presence into a wetlands or a jungle, and then gather another presence into that land. So we can make sacred sites in those other lands pretty quickly by using this. Additionally, it does 1 damage, and so once you create that sacred site, that's enough to kill off a town. So that is very interesting. Seems like this guy can come out of the gate pretty quick. I'll have to take a look at some build orders in order to see how fast we can come out, but I get the sense that we have so much build prevention that we can be very effective at slowing down the invaders, and then because the invaders have less health, any damage card we pick up is just going to start blowing up cities and just, cleaning house. But let's see. If we were to play all 4 of our starting cards, okay, they all have fire, 3 wind, and 2 earth. So we'd have, with no other elements, that really wouldn't do much for us. It would only 2 damage to explorers and then 2 damage in general. But if we pick up the additional earth off the top track on the very first present placement on the top track, that will get us an extra 2 damage on the innate. And then we'd be just a single fire short of doing 1 damage to every invader. When you get to the point of doing 1 damage to every invader, that is, kill everything in that land, right? Because let's say we do this at range 0 with a sacred site, 1 damage to every invader, that just kills infinite towns, right? And then 4 additional damage, so you kill 4 cities on top of an infinite number of towns. That's way too good, right? It kills all the explorers. That's insane, right? So it seems like this is the kind of guy that we'd want to just get everyone into 1 big stack and then wipe them all out easy. But if we were to do it at range 1, well, we'd kill all the explorers, and then, we could kill up to 4 towns, or we could kill 2 towns and 2 cities. We could kill 4 towns, or we could kill 2 towns and 1 city, or 2 cities. That's correct. Yeah. But so regardless of how you break that out, it's the same number of fear. It's 4 fear, regardless of how you slice that. But still, that's very powerful. So how are we looking at our different attributes? Offense. Clearly, our offense is good with our innate. We don't really have any damage coming out of our innate powers. We just had the Stinging Sandstorm. So, offense is strictly tied to the innate. Considering that to actually start doing damage, we need 3 fires, and there's no fires early in the presence track. We're going to have to get to 3 card plays in order to activate that ability. So, our offense actually is not as good as I thought at first. Okay, that's fine. It appears stronger than it is. Well, I guess we'll have to play test that to see. Anyways, control. Well, considering that we can prevent builds, we can push explorers and towns into Han, and we can do like 1 damage fast into a land, kill an explorer there. Right, that seems like a decent amount of control. It's not so much clean pushing, but I'd consider it control nonetheless, like build prevention. Fear. In all of our cards, we have 2 fear, and we have no flat, like just straight out fear from our innate. So that's actually very low fear production. We're going to be getting a lot of fear from destroying things. So we're going to have to take the offense, which once again, it doesn't seem like we have fantastic offense. Defense. We have Skip a Ravage, okay? And that is it. Interesting. Okay, so yeah, not very much defense. Support, giving and receiving. All right, well, we can give someone 2 energy straight out. That's really nice, right? Like, Boon of Vigor gives someone a bunch of energy. Early game it's just 2, late game it's a lot more. Just giving someone 2 is nice, but also they can pay energy to deal damage one of the lands. Both of those options seems very strong early, and both options seem to fall off pretty hard late. So that might be the kind of card that we might forget for a major, but it is our only 0-cost card, and it gives us fire, which is our most important element. So maybe we won't get rid of it too fast, but that card definitely seems to fall off as the game goes later. As far as receiving support, well, I guess this guy doesn't really have a very strong identity. He has a lot of tools, but really it just seems like his innate has really high elemental thresholds that he's not going to be able to hit easily and often. So I would say any kind of way that you could give him elements, specifically fire, is important, right? Like if you have the ability to give him fire on turn 1, then you could play 2 fire earth cards and deal significant damage into a land, right? That could be enough to like kill a city on turn 1. But that requires 1 additional fire. So maybe if you're playing someone like Snake, right, who can give a single element on turn 1, that might be a good pairing. Right? Just grow and make a sacred site into the land number 2 that starts with a city, and then use your innate there. Okay, Dahan. We have 1 Dahan power, but it's a very good Dahan power. Being able to gather and push, right? That could effectively move a whole bunch of Dahan 2 lands. Without any defense to pair with it, it's not incredibly powerful, but it's not bad, right? It's Dahan movement with additional utility on top of it. So I could see that being pretty effective. All right, as far as cards that we want to gain, certainly we're going to be needing elements. So we really want to have fire as a primary, earth as a secondary, and wind as a tertiary. We start off with more wind than we do earth in our starting cards, even though we need earth more, because earth tops out at 3, wind at 2. We do have 1 earth on our tracks, no wind, so in a sense we only need 2 and 2. But because the first innate that deals damage is just fire earth, I don't consider damage to explorers particularly important. Just 2 damage, being able to do that to buildings, I would consider much more important. Because that's a fire earth, that's what I care about most. But yeah, anything that deals damage, right? Because we're actually surprisingly light on damage here. So anything that can deal damage, we definitely want to use. Defense would also be pretty nice. Any kind of defend card will make use of our Dahan power. Being able to gather and push Dahan. So a defend card really of any size would be useful. And because we care about Earth, most defend cards provide Earth as well. So that could be a little bit of a nice combo there. All right, let's consider some openings. All right, so in general, adding presence is the best thing you can do. So my first consideration is to see how much can we aggressively use growth 2 with our opening. So if we go bottom, right, the second bottom is a blank. And if we go bottom top, the Earth we're not really going to be able to make use of because with only 2 card plays, we're not going to be hitting any of our thresholds anyways, or at least not the ones that require Earth. So either one of those is a blank. We could go top, gain 2 energy, right? So that's something to consider. But then the other option would be to go grow 3, which gives us a card, 2 energy, and a single presence. So since the second presence doesn't provide any marginal value, I'm inclined to think that we would start off with grow 3 and that we would go bottom. So this would give us 3 energy and 2 card plays on turn 1. Right. So I would think maybe 2 good cards to start off with would be Gift of Searing Heat plus Stinging Sandstorm. So Gift, just being able to, give someone energy is nice, right? It can smooth out someone else's opening. Maybe if you're playing like with Ocean, right? Just giving them 2 energy is just a lifesaver. But also giving them the option to just pay an energy and then kill off an Explorer fast on turn 1. If they have 1 excess energy, it can, be removing half their problems on turn 1 is just a really great thing that you can give to somebody else. So, and if you're playing solo, right, you stop one of your 2 lands immediately, right? And it gives you a really easy turn 2. But then Stinging Sandstorm will allow you to basically create a sacred site and destroy a town. So you could put one presence. You could put your 1 presence that you add into a land where it's like an explorer and nothing else. So they build, and then they build a town. You gather a presence in, which you will be able to do because it's a range 1 growth option. You gather presence in, and then that 1 damage kills the town. That's 2 fear. So that feels like the strongest option. Certainly something like Call on Herders for aid, being able to gather Dahan and then get a little bit of Han control and some pushing around is really nice too. But the reason why I think Gift plus Stinging Sandstorm is better is because that gives you 2 fire and 2 wind, which allows you to do 2 damage to explorers only, range 1 from a sacred site. So I don't know what our starting position is going to be with this spirit. Probably 1 in the high mountains, 1 in the high sands. That's just what I'm going to guess. But by doing grow 3, we don't necessarily have a sacred site. Use Stinging Sandstorm. We can create a sacred site, use that sacred site to use our innate power, and then that will solve one of the lands that will be ravaged on our first card. It'll solve one of the lands on our second card. So we had the option, maybe we just eat a blight on the other card that you're going to be, the other land on the first Explorer, or maybe we draft a defend, right? We have options. The point is that we have options, and it deals with one of the 2 things on your first 2 cards. So I like that opening. Then from there, we probably want to start hammering down on these double presence placements. So we're going to have some unknown card, plus Sweltering Exhaustion to prevent a Ravage, Call on Herders for aid to move some to Han. In general, I like to just take a little bit of Blight early, just focus on scaling. So I would say we'd probably want to go for Growth 2 and getting ourselves up to just a second energy would be nice. But if we get ourselves to a second energy and we played 2 cards, we'd go down to only 1 card in hand. So then maybe we could do like grow 3, 2 card plays, bottom, right? So let's see, if we went bottom, we would Well, first off, we have 2 leftover energy coming into this turn. So we'd be at 3 energy if we went bottom. And the cards in hand cost 3. So if we were to draft a 0 cost card, then we could make use of just going bottom here. And to hit our innate, we would need to have a fire, and then we would need to have a wind, earth, or both. So I was just taking a look at the card catalog, and it looks like there are 3 cards that cost 0 that provide fire, earth, 3 cards that cost 0 that provide fire, wind, and 1 card that costs 0 that provides all 3. So in total, there are 7 hits where if we were to pull any one of those 7 on our very first card gain, then we could go bottom here, and we could play Sweltering Exhaustion, call on Herders for aid, and then one of those 7 cards. And look at them, they're all pretty decent cards, right? They're all pretty useful cards. So that would then allow us to also gain access to our innate. Otherwise, we would not have access to the innate. So that makes me think that that is unlikely to happen, and therefore we should not plan around it. So instead, we could either grow Growth 2 top to gain a 2nd energy gain, or we could go for Growth 3, and we kind of don't gain any marginal benefit, but we gain an extra power card and more energy. I'm not a huge fan of that. Let's go top. And from there, we can decide, maybe we play Sweltering Exhaustion, and if we happen to draft a Fire Wind card, we could play that Fire Wind card as well, and it could be any amount, right? Because we'll have 4 energy, and 2 of it being spent on Sweltering Exhaustion, so any minor power whatsoever will be playable because they all cost 1 or 0. So we'd be able to do that, and then we could use our top level innate again. If we were to play Call on Herders for aid, we would not be able to use any innate, right? Because we need 3 fire, or 2 fire, 2 wind, right? And we're not going to be able to pull that off. So in that case, we'll probably go top, play Exhaustion. As far as the second card that we would play, certainly we could play Call on Herders for aid. We would have the energy for it. But we could also play the other card that we drafted. So, I mean, I guess either way, I'll just put down other, right? It just depends on the circumstance, whatever is best for us. So, coming into this turn, we would have just 1 card in hand going into turn 3. So we could gain a 2nd card with our Growth 3, right? We'd probably, we could go top track or bottom track. Bottom wouldn't give us any marginal benefit. Top would give us an excessive amount of energy. So I'd be more likely to go bottom for that reason. Unless if I felt inclined to maybe, pick up a major, forget a card that's in my discard pile. Certainly that's an option, right? So let's say that we were to gain a major, we go top, and let's say we're playing this in multiplayer. So turn 1, we'd have 3 energy, spend 1 on stinging. Turn 2, so we'd end the turn with 2 energy, and then next turn we'd go top, go up to 4 energy, spend 3 of it, go down to 1, and then so we'd have 1 energy left over, plus 2 for the growth option, so that puts us at 3, and then we'd either be at 5 or 6 after 5 if we went bottom track, 6 if we went top track, and then we could play that major plus, if we did not forget the card that we had in hand, we could play both of those together, or we could just play the 1 card if we forgot the one that's in hand, right? And we should have enough energy to play those majors, right? 5 or 6 energy is plenty. So if that is a good way to get a major, right? That is one option. Right, put down like an A here, and then right, you would play that major and then the other, and then you would go for growth 1 next, right? And that will give you another power card, another energy. You play 2 cards, go from there, right? And it's hard to know exactly how much energy we'll have. It depends on the major that we picked up, so on and so forth. Or another option, right? We could come here to option B, and then we could actually just reclaim immediately. And so we'll be at 2 energy gained, 2 cards. We'd have 1 energy rolling over. So we would have 4 energy this turn. 2 card plays, gain an extra power card. And, you know, if we wanted to set ourselves up for going straight across the bottom track, we could go from there. Right? Then, you know, there's a lot of variables. A lot of things could happen. Right? So we played 2 cards. And if we were to go this way, let's just say we gained a minor on turns 1 and 3. We would be at 4 in hand. So then we could do then here, we could go BG2 and go bottom, and then just play 3 cards. Right, and that would be for like a minors build. Because, yeah, then we'd be at 3 card plays, 2 energy gain, and then, you know, it goes from there, right? We'll have played 5 out of the 6 cards that we have, so we might have to do another reclaim, right? And we might wind up in a little bit of a back and forth reclaim loop. But once we get this point, right, after 4 turns, we will be at the point where every single individual presence added provides marginal value. So then we might wind up going like growth 1, right, play 3 cards, which will leave us with, I believe, 4 in hand. And then from there, we could just do like growth 3, right? If we had 4 in hand, right, we could do like a growth 2, bottom, right? Play our whole hand, 4 cards. And then basically we'd be on like a reclaim cycle, right? Where we'd growth 1, then growth 3, growth 1, growth 3, in order to try and spread out our presence gains. But that's so far removed that it's hard to know. What's exciting though is that both growth 2 and growth 3 are both viable. You know, growth 3 lets you really scale up well without having to go top track. A lot of interesting options. Certainly because we gained so much value from those small damage miners, that going for a miners build can be very effective. So that is something I am interested in. It really is dependent on the cards that you gain though, so we probably want to try and do as much growth 1, growth 3 as possible in order to give ourselves more opportunities to get a hit. Right, so if we were to go here, maybe we go top, we pick up a major, right, and then things can really go any direction from there. We don't get a ton of elements off of our tracks, and it takes a while for us to get there. So we're not going to get a ton of assistance on these majors. So, right, because if we go all the way across the top track, right, we'd be looking at like 2 card plays, 5 energy, and 2 elements, which is good, but not insane. But and then, I guess in general, I'm just less inclined to go for majors. So that is something that I might be less likely to go for myself. But anyways, let's predict how we might do against these adversaries. Okay, so against Prussia, we're gonna not have a good turn 1, right? If we're playing multiplayer, then we are very likely to get triple bladed, or maybe we open up with like a call on herders for aid plus a stinging sandstorm to avoid that triple blade, right? Or maybe we just do a double blade with the sweltering exhaustion, right? But we'll be taking some damage early, right? Where we don't open up insanely fast. In solo play, it's a lot better for us, right? Because Gift and Sandstorm will solve 2 out of the 4 lands. Sweltering can solve the 3rd land. We're only looking at 1 blight, so that's pretty good. And then Call on Herders for Aid is obviously very powerful against Prussia. So it's easier. It's going to be easier solo, But it's a little bit of inconsistency depending on the way that the deck goes. Certainly, if we keep on hitting the same land repeatedly, Sweltering Exhaustion gains a lot of value because we can just let one land build up like crazy, skip the whole Ravage, and then just come in later, put a Sacred Site down there. Maybe there's like 5 buildings, right? And they all lose 1 health. It's effectively dealing 5 damage just with an innate, or just with a special rule. Very, very powerful stuff. But yeah, so let's say that we solve 2 or 3 of the lands on turn 1. That uses up a lot of our resources. So our second Ravage could be pretty painful, and it's dependent on what the single minor power that we gain does. So and because we're not gonna be able to use our innate, like if we open up with like Gift plus Stinging, we can solve one of the 2 lands on our second turn, or on our second Explore card. But if we're playing multiplayer, well, either way, we'll be able to use those 2 to solve one of the 2 lands that it comes in the second Explore. However, it is dependent on, maybe there's a 50% chance that you wind up hitting the same land again twice. So definitely a rocky start because we have 2 weak presence options right at the very beginning. We have a slower opening. So I'll say this, it's inconsistent. However, once we get into the mid game, we should be able to clean up pretty easily because Prussia's like 3rd and 4th turn tends to be its weakest point of the game, and that's right when we're going to be able to start becoming more effective, and we're actually going to be able to be doing damage, using our special rule, hitting our innate. So right when Prussia's at its weakest, we should be starting to spike, and that'll be the opportunity for us to get ahead. Sweden, I expect this to be a very good matchup, because if Sweden just gets a runaway land, we can just skip the entire Ravage altogether. Additionally, using Call on Herders will allow us to gather a whole bunch of Dahan together and protect ourselves against the stage 2 escalation. Picking off a single Explorer with Gift, very powerful. And then Stinging Sandstorm, just being able to pick off a town, it's great, right? They start with all those extra buildings, so if we ever find ourselves with a little bit of excess damage, there's plenty of targets for it. But because Sweden is so flimsy, right? Like they hit really hard, but they fall down pretty easily too. If we play really carefully in the early game, in the mid game, I expect it should be a very easy matchup for us. So we just need to survive the first couple turns. Right? Because they start with like 2 lands with cities in them. So typically that's where people fall apart, take a double blight, take the Sweden 5. But I expect that with the Sweltering Exhaustion, we'll be A-okay there. England. So England 5 is completely negated by our special rule. And so England 5 to us is the same as England 4 for any other spirit. So really it comes down to how much fear can we produce in order to not have to worry about the double builds coming out of England 6. And in that category, we're going to struggle. We only produce 2 fear out of our starting cards, so we really need to draft fear cards. All right, so up next we have France. Now, there's a lot of innates that deal with explorers, but they only really deal with 1 explorer at a time, and so France is able to beat those guys pretty effectively. However, we have the opposite problem here, where we can kill 2 explorers with our top level innate, and normally that second killing of an explorer is completely useless. But against France, it's exactly what the doctor ordered. Being able to kill off both explorers with a simple innate completely negates France's early game advantage. And so, and then if we ever don't prevent builds, killing off towns is exactly the same as killing off explorers for us. So I actually expect France is going to be a very good matchup for us, as long as we can pick up just a couple cards just to get just a little bit of damage going. I think France should be very easy for us. Having that Dahan movement, we can always make sure we set up for good slave rebellions. Gift of Searing Heat isn't so great. We'd probably just use it to give people energy. But 3 out of our 4 starting cards are fantastic. So I think France is going to be a great matchup. I think the key here is just picking up any damage cards. Just so that way you can keep those towns in check. But besides that, it should be free rolling against France. Habsburg, another adversary that just stacks up a whole lot of towns in one land in the same exact way. If we could just, put a sacred site in there and all of a sudden they're like 6, 7 towns that they have in one land get cleaned up super easy. So once again, we want to just focus on our innates, focus on any damage. We have a weak opener, right? Because we have the 2 useless presence additions at the early game. But Habsburg, once again, incentivizes you just to take a little bit of blight early. So we'd probably just change around our build order such that we let the first ravage happen completely. Don't worry about sweltering exhaustion. And instead, we would just focus on scaling. We'd probably wind up using growth 3 instead of growth 2 on our second turn, just to get that extra card, just to get a little extra energy, and just kind of let Habsburg put out that blight, so that way we can then, fight back when the opportunity comes. So here, I would say just focus on scaling. And after Habsburg lays down a few blight, weakens their own, if they deny themselves a little bit with their stage 2 escalation by putting those blights out there, then we can come in after we've added our presence and we can start to actually do damage. We can kill them very efficiently, very effectively. Okay, Russia. All right, once again, having the ability to deal with 2 explorers in one action with the top level innate is great, because that's the only way you're going to be able to deal with Russia's explorers. So similar to France, having the ability to deal with a second explorer goes from a useless ability to a very potent, very important ability. The other damage abilities down the line is nice, right? We can use something like Call on Herders for Aid to get a whole bunch of explorers into one land and then blow them all up with our innate. But yeah, so Russia doesn't have a lot of buildings, and certainly we can use things like Gift to push around their explorers a little bit at the start. Stinging Sandstorm becomes a little bit less good, right? Because it only deals 1 damage. So if there's an explorer and a town in a single land, yeah, we get to pick off the town, but we still have to find a way to deal with the explorer. So the way that we utilize Stinging Sandstorm is suddenly going to be about preventing builds as opposed to destroying buildings. So we need to change our priorities. But this one should be a pretty good matchup for us. Once again, while we're scaling, Russia incentivizes you to take a little bit of blight to prevent the Russia 6 trigger. So we can focus on scaling as well. However, we don't have enough explorer removal and enough explorer control to just let them run away in the mid game. So we have to pick up some fear cards, so that way we can set ourselves up for a a terror level 2 victory. All right, and last we have Scotland. Scotland, they put an excessive amount of buildings down. Everything on the coast, they basically don't have explorers. So the first thing that we need to do against Scotland is get sacred sites on lands 1, 2, and 3 as quickly as we can, because that's where Scotland is the strongest. If we can lock down that coastal, then we'll be able to lock down the rest of the game from there. So we want to grow quickly into the coasts, and then and just let the inlands blight a little bit. By the time the Scotland coastal card comes up, we need to make sure that we have everything locked down, or else the game will, run away from us. But because we have the tools to do that, right, and we can make all those buildings lose a health, this should be a good matchup for us, right? Because Scotland just has a disproportionately high number of buildings. So yeah, that one should be pretty good for us. Certainly the different boards could make this matchup easier or more difficult, because if we have mountains and sands on the coast, having both of them, that's going to make it easier for us because, we grow into those lands better. But yeah, I think this guy has a lot of really good matchups. Sweden and Prussia, I'd say, would probably be the hardest. But Russia and Scotland could be tricky as well. Really, the thing with this guy is that he just seems to not... He has all the tools for damage dealing. He just doesn't have the damage. So any damage you get whatsoever will be fantastic. It's just a matter of getting there. Last, and certainly not least, we have Fathomless Mud of the Swamp. Alright, so this spirit special rule is offer no firm foundations. At your sacred site, build actions at an explorer instead of a town or a city. That's insane. That will really make it really easy to get a Terror level 2 victory. Because if buildings never come up in the first place, then there's nothing to be destroyed. And so you should be able to end the game pretty soon. The question is, do you have enough fear to get there? Because normally you would gain a lot of fear by destroying buildings, but if there are no buildings to destroy, you could wind up with just like a couple explorers just like running around, and you just chase explorers around forever, and you can never quite end the game, and you just don't get enough fear. So we'll have to see how the rest of his abilities work together, but I can almost imagine that this special rule is a trap. It seems amazing, and then you suddenly just prevent yourself from being able to win. But anyways, got his growth options. So first, Reclaim, add a presence at range 0. Okay, that's obviously insane. Growth 2 adds 2 presence, both at range 1. So having a Reclaim presence and a double presence placement on the same guy, that is a ton of presence going out. And then last, gain a power card, add a presence, and gain 2 energy. So what's interesting to note here is that this is the only way to gain another card and to get more energy. So that suggests to me that unless if there's some other way to gain cards, he's not going to get a lot of cards. That might push us maybe towards majors, because we might be reclaiming and playing that major a lot more. I don't know, we'll have to see everything else. Presence tracks, energy goes from 1 to 5, cards goes from 1 to 4, and they're in every single presence placement gives you a marginal benefit. There's no dead spot. So that's good. More energy than cards, generally suggest majors as well, right? So I'm thinking this guy might be a bit of a majors player. 4 different kinds of elements is interesting. He doesn't have 2 of any one kind of element on his tracks. So let's go down to his innate power. Spreading and Dreadful Mire. Slow power, range 1 from a sacred site, which we care about sacred sites with our special rule. We can add sacred sites easily with growth 2. Range 1, targets invaders. Move a presence from the origin sacred site into the target land. So we can move our presence out. We can shift them around on the board. Okay. And then, let's see, fear, damage, push to Han, fear, damage, push to Han, and then 2 damage. So that's not a very powerful innate, right? 2 fear, 4 damage, push 2 to Han. That doesn't seem too crazy. I feel like that's not going to be enough to win you the game. 2 fear, 4 damage at all the way topped out, right? Takes 7, 10, 12 elements to get 4 damage, 2 fear. That doesn't seem very strong. That seems like a very difficult thing to pull off. Well, let's see what starting cards gives us for elements. So first we have a 0-cost slow power, Exaltation of Tangled Growth. You have to target another spirit, and target spirit pays an energy to gain a power card, and you pay 2 energy to gain a power card. Okay, so we have another way to gain a power, but paying 2 and spending a card to gain a power card isn't great. It's worth noting that in solo play, you can pay 3 energy and gain 2 power cards. That's pretty good. Gaining multiple power cards in one shot, having a net positive gain on the size of your hand, that's very powerful. It also gives us 3 out of our 4 elements. Although I guess it's worth noting that grass is only used on the 4th layer, or the 3rd, I guess, if we can ignore that first one. So on our tier 3 and 8 is the only way to use plant. So this gives us the moon, earth, or sorry, it gives us the water, earth, but does not give us moon. Moon and earth are equally important, and water is slightly more important than either of those. Okay. Second, we have foul vapors and fetid muck. Slow, range 2 from a sacred site. Fear and push 2 explorers. Okay, plays into the explorers theme a little bit. Gives us water, earth again, right? No moon. Doesn't give us grass, even though grass doesn't matter too much. Okay, next we have intractable thickets and thorns. 2 energy, gives us every single one of our elements. Fast, range 1. Fear and defend 5. Okay, great, so defensive. So we're preventing buildings from existing. We're pushing these guys around. Creating a defend 5, okay? And then last we have open shifting waterways. 1 cost, slow, range 1. Gather 2 Dahan. If Dahan invaders are present, fear and a damage. Gives us moon water. Okay, so every single card in our starting grip gives us water. 3 of them give us earth. 2 of them give us a moon. So earth is a little bit easier to come by than moon. Also, earth comes up on our presence tracks earlier than moon. So we're more drafting cards. We care more about picking up moons than we do about picking up earths. 2 of our cards give us a plant, but we get a plant on our tracks super early, and we only need 2 at the very highest level. So plant just doesn't even matter to draft. So drafting moons is going to be pretty important. Water is going to be the most important. And then earth is going to be less important. Okay, so let's see. Altogether, we get 3 fear from our starting cards and 2 fear from our innate. So little trickles of fear. Nothing, no big fear spike. If we played every single one of our cards, we would be 1 moon shy from hitting every single innate. And so by the time we get to 4 card plays, we'll have passed the moon on our presence track. So by the time we can play 4 cards, we can hit everything just by playing our starting hand, right? So we could just, do like a little bit of a reclaim loop, right? Reclaim, add a presence, play the whole grip incessantly. It costs 3 energy per cycle to do that, so it will take 3, 6, 8 total presence taken off before we can do that in perpetuity. And then I guess that also considers us gaining nothing off of Exaltation of Tangle Growth. So we need to draft a few cards before we can perpetually just use our innate to win the game. But, okay. Let us consider the different categories. So offense. We don't have any damage. We have like 3 instances of 1 damage. So we really don't have damage, right? That's not going to be enough to kill a town. All right, I guess we have the 4 total on our innate, right? So late game, we can start destroying cities and towns, but the whole process of getting there, we don't have any offense. So that's not going to do too good. Control. Now, control, oftentimes we consider control to be like pushing, and pushing denies builds. So would we consider having buildings adding explorers instead of buildings? Would that be considered control? I mean, if it is, then this guy has quite a bit of control, right? We just have a special rule that gives us plenty of control. We have push to explorers. So that's a thing, right? Fear. I guess I already said this one, right? We have 5 up to, we cap out at 5 and 8 fear. So that's okay, right? But it takes us a while to get there, right? It's not like it's all on our cards and we can reclaim and keep on slamming those fear cards, right? All of the cards produce 1 fear each, so it's mediocre, not terrible, but it's mediocre. Defense, we have a defend 5, so that's pretty good. It does cost 2 for a defend 5, which is a little bit more expensive than I would prefer, but it also does come with range 1, so we don't need to get into the land in order to defend, whereas the other defend 5 cards require you to be in the land, right? This defend 6 requires a sacred site, so it's a little bit more flexible, and it gives us perfect elements. So those are some advantages to it, but it's a little bit expensive. Support. Support's not great. I mean, there's other spirits that can, give people power cards for free, give them energy, right? Give you a card and an energy. But this guy gives you a card, but you have to pay for your card. That's not great. And that card gives you like this trap where you're incentivized to spend 2 energy to gain a power card. So that's not super exciting. As far as receiving support, this guy really struggles to gain power cards. So he would love to get targeted with any ability that gives you power cards. As far as being given elements or energy, I get the sense that that's not going to be a big deal for us, since we don't need an excessive amount of any one element in order to hit our thresholds. We can hit 3 card plays on turn 2, and all of our cards start with water, so I expect that we'll be able to reasonably, easily, consistently hit our innates. And so, as far as energy goes, we can pretty quickly get up to 2 energy gain a turn. Our starting hand only costs 3 total. We can gain +2 energy from growth 3, so using that once lets us go through our whole opening hand with no issues. So I can't imagine that we'll need support in those ways. So lastly, let's take a look at Dahan. We have a little bit of Dahan movement. It's not great, right? We just have a simple gather 2, which then produces a fear and deals damage. So certainly that'll be great to use in combination with our defend. Gather some Dahan, right? Pick off an explorer, defend the land, so that way it can fight back and destroy the town that might be there, or the city that might be there. But otherwise, it's not a ton of Dahan movement, and it's slow, so we can't be particularly reactionary. But that being said, our innate does also give us Dahan push. So maybe we can use that to set up with our defense or any other defend that we draft as well. So maybe Dahan, we don't have any big Dahan movement, but since it is tied to our innate, it's consistent, so it'd actually give us a few points in the Dahan category. So that actually, with that in mind, if we can pick up some defense early, any other defend cards, that's actually a pretty viable strategy for us. We'll just do some Dahan movement and defense, setting ourselves up wherever we may need. So we're not going to be able to gain very many cards. And so what we're looking to gain with our cards, what would our weakness really is being able to produce enough fear. I get the sense that we'll be very good at setting ourselves up for a terror level 2 victory, but we'll need to actually get the fear to get there. So drafting fear cards, and there are some very good fear cards that are in our elements. Moon has a lot of fear, and there is that 1/0 cost 3 fear water card as well. That requires a sacred site. So those would be the types of cards that I think we'd want to gain first, because otherwise it seems like we have a lot of good control, so the game should not be able to spiral out of our hands. But let's consider some openings for us. So the first thing that I'm thinking about is, can we hit our innate on turn 1? And the answer is definitely yes. So our first tier of our innate requires a moon, 2 water, and an earth. So since every card that we have in our starting hand gives us a water, 2 of our cards produce moon, but one of them is defense, so we're not going to play that on turn 1. So that means that we're going to have to play open shifting waterways on turn 1. Then we just need to play any card that provides a water and an earth. And both of our other cards produce both water and earth. So that's pretty good for us. If we, for some reason, did not have the earth, we could just go for add 2 presence, go bottom, get the earth off the bottom track, and then still be able to hit it. But the other element that we have available to us on turn 1 would be a plant, and that's just not going to be useful. So, if we were to add 2 presence, getting the element does not really give us any value. And considering we only need 1 energy on turn 1, we don't need to go top. So from my perspective, the only way that we could use growth 2 on turn 1 would be to go bottom. Then going into turn 3, right? So let's see. Turn 1 would go growth 2, bottom. And there we would play Waterways. And then we could either play Exaltation of Tangled Growth or Foul Vapors. And I'd be inclined to play Foul Vapors because it allows us to push some explorers around, gives us fear. So it just lets us set ourselves up for a better turn 2 by solving, one of the freshly explored lands. So I'll put down, and if we were to take Exaltation, that requires energy to gain a power card, and we're not going to have that extra energy if we go with Growth 2. So I'll say Vapors for the other card. Then the next turn, if we did Growth 3, okay, and we went bottom, we'd have 3 card plays, 3 energy. So we could play any minor, and we could play that minor along with Intractable Thickets for defend 5. Right, so we could use Shifting Waterways to pull some Dahan into a land, let it build up, then we can defend it. So let's see, that'll be Thickets. And then if we were to play Exaltation of Tangled Growth, that would give us 1 moon, 2 waters, and 3 earth. So if we happened to draft a moon water card, then that would allow us to use our 2nd level of our innate. So 2 fear, 2 damage, push 2 Dahan. And that would be really nice. If we don't hit a moon water card specifically, then we would not be able to hit that. And considering that we wouldn't even be able to gain a power card off Exaltation, we'd only have 1 excess energy, we probably would throw down a defend and then just play the other. So it really depends whether or not we get the card with good elements. Since we don't have enough energy to gain a card off Exaltation anyways, even if we draft a 1-cost card, we can still play it because we'll have 3 energy for the turn. So I'll put down Thickets, and then I'll just put down Others, because it really depends. Then at that point, turn 4, we would do a Growth 1, do a Reclaim, and there's no marginal value in picking up the plant, so I'd say we go bottom track again, pick up that moon. We'd have just 1 energy, but if we were to play the Shifting Waterways and then both of our 0-cost cards, that would give us 2 moons, 3 waters, and 3 earths, which will give us our tier 2 innate. So that is definitely something worth considering. But the problem there is that we've played Exaltation of Tangled Growth twice, and both times we've not gained a power card. So that's not very exciting for me. And all of this really starts with using our Growth 2 on turn 1. So as I talk this out, I don't think that's very good. And so instead, let's consider taking Growth 3 on turn 1, right, going off the bottom so we actually get some value. And then we'll have 3 energy. So here we would want to play Waterways, and then we would want to play Tangled Growth. And that way we can spend that 2 extra energy to gain a card. So that turn we'll have gained 2 more cards. We'll be at 0 energy, but we'll have 4 cards in hand going into the next turn. Well, going into the next turn, we'd probably want to play Intractable Thickets, right? So that we could defend where we set up our Dahan. So we could either do another Growth 3, or we could do a Growth 2 going across the top and gaining 2 energy. So if we were to do that, gaining 2 energy going across the top, we could play Foul Vapors and Intractable Thickets, and that will, once again, let us use our 1st level innate. So that actually seems quite a bit stronger to me. So we'll use Thickets and Vapors. Great. So that will allow us to use our first level innate, produce a fear, push 2 Dahan on the slow phase, and we get that defend 5, utilizing the Dahan that we'd set up on the previous turn. So now at this point we'll have 0 energy in the bank, 2 brand new cards in hand, unknown cards in hand, and then we could, we'll have 2 card game, 2 card plays. So certainly that's enough. We would not want to do a reclaim yet. We could, depending on the cards we have in hand, if the 2 cards are good and we're happy with them and we think it would be a good turn just playing those 2 cards, it would probably be best to do a growth 2. Okay, so I'll just say option A would be growth 2, going bottom, and then just playing our 2 cards. And then the other option would be to be growth 3 off, I would say off the bottom here. So that way when we reclaim, we can access a 3rd card play. So we'd be going for the bottom, and then we'd just play 2 of those 3 cards. And that's it. And no matter what cards they are, either way, we'll have enough energy for it because we'll have 2 energy per turn. So in the early game, we're probably just picking up minors. None of our starting cards seem bad enough to just get rid of immediately. And then regardless of what we do, on turn 4, we're probably looking at a reclaim going off of the bottom. And then we can play 3 cards. And just depending on what we chose to do on turn 3 will affect how much energy we have and the cards that we drafted, etc., etc. But getting ourselves to 3 card plays will be great because then we can reliably hit our second innate. So 2 fear, 2 damage, push 2 Dahan. That seems like it's going to be our bread and butter. So we can start churning up that fear, and we can eventually get ourselves to a terror level 2 victory. I can't imagine this guy ever having to deal with a terror level 3 victory, outside of maybe like England running away from you. Just because you can prevent cities from ever building. So that's just way too good in my opinion. But all right, let's consider how we're going to do against various adversaries. So against Brandenburg Prussia. So if we start off with waterways and growth, okay, that gives us our innate. So we have the stage 3 card immediately, and we don't actually solve any of them right off the bat. The only thing we could do is we could set ourselves up with a sacred site in one of the lands where they explored, so that way that land will have 2 explorers in it, and then we can use our innate to deal the damage and kill one of them off. Right? Or maybe we use foul vapors to push them both away, and then we can use our innate to prevent the next card from building, right? By killing the explorer that's in that land. But then we'll be able to use shifting waterways and then intractable thickets in order to defend whatever the biggest land is there, right? So if they have an explorer, town, city that's hitting for 6, defend 5 is sufficient. The 2 Dahan will take care of the city and an explorer, so it'll produce a little bit of fear. That'll be enough to pick up a fear card. So if against Prussia, we'd probably open up with foul vapors instead of exaltation of tangled growth as our turn 1, but then it would just be the other way around going into turn 2, where we'd play exaltation, and that extra 2 energy will float across, and it'll all work out the same in the end. So I can see Prussia, right? We're going to be taking probably 2 blight right off the bat, and then from there we should be cruising for a little bit. So this should be a good matchup, but it relies on one of the opening explorers going into a land that we start with presence. I don't know if we start with a sacred site or if we start with 2 presence in 2 separate lands, but we need to be an opening explorer into a land that we have presence, such that we can use our special rule to protect protect one of those lands. That's a good matchup with a good explorer. So Sweden. Since we have a lot of push 1 Dahan, depending on the board setup that we have, that can either be really useful or really useless as far as protecting ourselves from Sweden escalation goes. Thankfully, they start off quite a bit slower, at least in terms of explorers, but in terms of their buildings, since they start with... Sweden does not start slow. Sweden starts very, very fast. And they start fast in a way that we're going to really struggle with, because they start with about 4 lands with buildings. And so that means our special rule to prevent the building from happening in the first place, it's not going to be very good. And the intractable thickets only defends for 5, and that's not going to be good enough to protect us against Sweden. So I think this will be pretty tricky for us, right? It's all about surviving that opening, and then we'll be good from there, because we can, start gathering up the Dahan, and, we can push everything around, and basically we'll probably just wind up just putting all the Dahan into like a little one land just off in the corner, and never let Sweden flip it over, and just, use them periodically. Maybe we put them on the coast, and then we just defend every once in a while whenever Sweden pops their head up over there. But otherwise, we really don't want to go into the Dahan and defend game plan. We have great explorer control, and we have low amounts of damage, so we really need to pick up some kind of way to deal with their buildings right off the bat. In fact, this might be a matchup where we'd consider going for majors, so that we can pick up even more damage in order to destroy their buildings. So maybe instead of going for a bottom track approach, right, we do the same first turn, right, shifting waterways and exaltation of tangled growth, but then and then we go top, right, should do the same stuff there, but then on turn 3 we might choose to do growth 3 and then go top track, because that will give us, I believe, 5 energy and 2 card plays, and we'll have just picked up a major, and we probably would just get rid of exaltation of tangled growth. Like, we don't need to be wasting energy on that kind of stuff, and hope to just pick up a really good major that can deal some damage, and then probably do like a growth 1, growth 3 back and forth to try and pick up as many cards as we can, right? We probably wouldn't be able to do a whole lot of growth 2 in that situation if we want to keep on topping off our energy to keep on playing this major power. But it really depends on which major you pick up in that circumstance. So I'm going to say Sweden, we're probably going to be dependent on majors, because our toolkit just does not seem very effective at dealing with Sweden. All right, England. Well, our special rule is clearly going to be great against England. England is all about putting tons of buildings out there, and we prevent buildings from ever existing. So I can see this being a great matchup for us, but it's also possible we might just be too slow. This one would definitely require some playtesting to see how good or how ineffective Fathomless Mud is against England. But I'm inclined to say that this should be a decent matchup for us. However, we do not have any damage, right? Like, we can't even get rid of a town with what we got. We'd have to use shifting waterways plus 2 levels of our innate, all to destroy a single town. We cannot do anything about a city, right? We'd have to use Dahan and defend to deal with a single city. So if we're not able to get ahead with our special rule, then I think we'd fall pretty far behind these guys. We have a lot of explorer control, which is not the trick against England. So I'm inclined to say that this is... I'd say this one's definitely going to be a bit of a coin flip. We probably would go into majors as well here, just so that we can pick up some heavy-hitting cards and, actually be able to fight back against England. And our special rule would be incredibly important, but not good enough to get the job done by itself. I think we have enough built-in fear. We might just barely be able to keep our heads above water, but everything all told, we produce 5 fear. So hopefully we can keep flipping fear cards, because that is enough for 1 fear card. But that would require a lot of reclaiming and some good card gains. So up next we have France. And France, they put out 2 explorers, and that makes Foul Vapors fantastic. This is another situation we'd probably play Foul Vapors on turn 1 instead of on turn 2, just so that way we can lock down one of the lands, right at the beginning, or solve one of the lands right at the beginning. So that way those 2 explorers don't turn into 2 towns on that second build. So because we're so good at preventing builds, I think this should be a strong matchup for us. Now, the way that France 1 reads, I'm inclined to believe that we would prevent a build from happening, but then we would transform the explorers. And in fact, as I say that, I wondered, there would have to be a ruling to see how France 1 would interact. Because as I pull it up here, and I read France 2, it says you just replace the explorer with a town. So that tells me that your special rule does nothing, because that's after invaders build in a land with 2 or more explorers. And I wonder, is the 2 or more explorers counted before or after? Right, so if there's a single explorer in a land and we have a sacred site, does that build, create an explorer, then there are 2 explorers, so one of them transforms into a town, effectively circumventing the whole thing? If that's how it works, then France is just a terrible matchup for us, because actually we have no special rule whatsoever. And in fact, it could even make things worse if, we're relying on them building a city, right? Sometimes you let France build a city so that way there's 1 less town that exists on the board. But then that city actually becomes a town, and you're no better off. So I'll say that this one is dependent on rules. But the way that I read it, I think that this could just be a terrible matchup for us, because we just do not have the tools to be able to deal with it. Because we only have a defend 5. France is hitting for 8 once you get to stage 2. That's not nearly enough. So we'd really have to focus on killing off all these little explorers all over the place. But I'm inclined to believe that France is going to be a bad matchup for us. Okay, next we have this Habsburg. Habsburg also has some interesting building rules. So if you have an inland and it would build a city, you instead build 2 towns. And I think that would mean that you would get 2 explorers. And if that's the case, then Habsburg could be a pretty easy matchup, because Habsburg deals extra damage when towns are adjacent, right? So if you're preventing towns from ever being built in the first place, then that's not a big deal. The towns gather, right? Explorers don't gather. The towns are durable. The explorers aren't the things that are durable. So really the only way, after you get yourself started, the only way that you're going to be adding more towns to the board is through the stage 2 escalation, which it's quite easy to let a few blights happen. And with the Habsburg 5 reminder card. Outside of that, I reasonably believe that we can prevent pretty much all the buildings from going up with Habsburg. And so for that reason, that could be a pretty easy matchup for us. Certainly right at the very beginning, that first little bit, it's going to be tricky. We have no way of pushing towns. So if we happen to be threatened with some 8 damage ravages, we're just going to have to take it. And we just have to hope that we just don't get 2 8 damage ravages in a row. Because otherwise, we're stuck, right? We don't have enough defend to fully protect ourselves, so we'd basically be spending a card just to prevent a loss condition, and still taking a blight, which is like sad, right? Like we still are losing on the board. We're just not losing the entire game altogether. But Habsburg is definitely well within our control. I'd say it's all about getting lots of presence out fast. So maybe against Habsburg, we might be inclined to use Growth 2 quite a bit more, just to really pump all our presence out quickly. All right, Russia, the explorer people. Well, explorers is definitely what we're good against. However, we also produce more explorers. So that could be, we might just be shooting ourselves in the foot with this special rule, similar to France. It just comes down to, do we have the ability to do lots of damage to clear them up? And the answer is no. In the early game, we're only dealing 1 damage at a time, so that it produces a fear for the innate, produces fear for pushing the explorer. So we'll push through the fear deck very quickly. However, a defend 5 is not enough to really protect you against Russia. Any 3 items you're protected against, but beyond that, or three explorers, 3 towns, right? Any cities, will push through a defend 5, but because Russia hits so hard, your defend is weaker, your special rule is weaker. We're not dealing a ton of damage in any one single land, so I think Russia is going to be really hard for us. And that's going to be, we're going to have to draw some good cards. And since we don't have good card gain, I could see this being a really tough matchup. For Russia, I think, gosh, we just need to let them build. We did not use our special rule, right? We need to focus on just gaining lots of cards, so that way we can go big and over the top and just have to take our lumps early. Yeah, Habsburg and Russia are just playing out opposite. And last but not least is Scotland. And Scotland, I think, well, first of all, it's you just can't lose to the additional loss condition. You just put a sacred site on any one of the coastal lands, and then you just prevent any city from ever being built there, and then that just doesn't exist. Additionally, right, you can clear out a land, and then Scotland says that coastal lands still build. Well, it builds a explorer, right? So it's not a big deal. You really don't need to worry about it. So our special rule is incredibly powerful here. And then, Scotland is just resilient and just has consistent pressure. But because we add presence on reclaim, we never have to take an off turn either. So we can apply consistent pressure. So I feel like this should be a good matchup for us. But we're going to want to draft, building destroying powers. Because Scotland keeps on adding all these towns in the coasts, on explorers, and on the inlands for Scotland 6, we can't rely on our innate and our Dahana defense to survive. So we're going to need to focus on drafting big damage against Scotland. So yeah, this guy is the least intuitive of all of the spirits that I've looked at today. And this one I think will take the most amount of playtesting to figure out, how does he really work, and is he any good? Anything like that. He seemed very interesting. He has quite the toolbox, but he's not really, it doesn't appear to be great at any one thing. So we'll see how that goes.